The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and broken promises. Thomas Brennan sat in the wooden chair by the window, watching dust particles dance in the afternoon sunlight that slanted through the blinds. His dress shirt was wrinkled from the 6-hour drive from Omaha, and he hadn't shaved in 3 days. Not that anyone in this room seemed to notice or care. They were all too busy waiting for Walter Brennan's last words to be read aloud. Evelyn Price, the attorney, sat behind her desk with the patience of someone who had done this several hundred times before. She was 65, with silver hair pulled back into a tight bun and glasses that caught the light when she looked down at the documents. She had known Walter for 40 years, probably knew things about him that no one else in this room did. But if that was true, her face didn't reveal it. Dale Brennan sat at the front row with his wife Linda and their 2 college-age kids. Dale was 43, 3 years older than Tom, and he looked every day of it. His face was weathered from years of Nebraska sun and wind. He wore a new pair of Wranglers and a pressed Western shirt that still had the fold lines visible. His boots were polished. Tom could see his cousin's leg bouncing, a nervous habit that hadn't changed since they were kids. The other relatives filled the remaining chairs like a congregation waiting for service to begin. Rachel, another cousin, with her husband whose name Tom could never remember. Uncle Peter, Walter's younger brother, who had moved to Arizona 20 years ago and only came back for funerals. A few others whose connection to Walter was distant, but whose interest in his assets was keen. Evelyn cleared her throat, the sound cutting through the murmuring like a gavel. The room fell silent. She began to read. "We are here for the reading of the last will and testament of Walter Edward Brennan, deceased March 21st, 2024, at the age of 89. The words flowed over Tom like water over rocks. He wasn't really listening. He was thinking about the funeral 3 days ago. The small church in Valentine, Nebraska, barely half full. Walter hadn't been a social man, hadn't been a talker, spent most of his 89 years working his ranch, keeping to himself and dying quietly in his sleep. To my nephew Dale Brennan, Evelyn read, I leave the ranch house situated at 345 Ranch Road, together with all structures, outbuildings, and improvements thereon. Also the 1,200 acres comprising the main ranch property, described in sections 11, 12, and 13 of Township 33 North, Range 29 West. Also the cattle, approximately 200 head, currently grazing said land. Also the equipment shed and all farming and ranching equipment contained therein. Dale's legs stopped, bouncing. His wife grabbed his hand. Tom could see the relief wash over his cousin's face. Of course Dale got the ranch. He and Linda had been living there for 15 years, ever since Walter's health started failing and he needed help managing the place. Dale had put in the work, earned it. Evelyn continued, to my niece Rachel McAllister, I leave the 40-acre parcel bordering Snake River, Section 2 of Township 32 North, Range 29 West. Also the savings bonds in the amount of $3,000. Rachel smiled a tight smile. Her husband nodded. They'd probably already calculated what the land was worth. To my brother Peter, Evelyn went on, I leave my 1993 Ford F-150 pickup truck and the balance of my checking account, currently $14,724. Uncle Peter looked disappointed. Tom knew what he was thinking. 15 years ago, that checking account had been 6 figures. Walter had been burning through savings to cover ranch expenses as cattle prices fell and costs rose. To my nephew Thomas Brennan, Evelyn's voice changed ever so slightly when she read Tom's name. Softened maybe, or maybe he imagined it. I leave my 1948 Ford 8N tractor, currently located in the back pasture of my original homestead property. This tractor must be removed from the property within 90 days of my death, or it will revert to the estate. The room went quiet in a different way. Not the silence of attention, but the silence of confusion. A 1948 tractor? That had been rotting in the weather for 20 years? That barely ran before it was abandoned? Dale let out a short bark of laughter. Enjoy your junk heap, cousin. Maybe you can sell it for scrap. Linda elbowed him, but not hard enough to make it look like she disagreed. Rachel was smiling, not even bothering to hide it. Uncle Peter was shaking his head. Tom felt his face grow warm, that old familiar sensation. Humiliation washing over him like a wave. Of course, Walter had left him something worthless. Of course, everyone else got the things that mattered. Land, money, things you could use or sell or build a life on, and he got a broken tractor. Evelyn continued reading, but Tom had stopped listening. He was looking out the window again, watching the clouds move slowly across the spring sky. He was thinking about the last time he'd seen Walter, 2 Christmases ago, when the divorce was fresh and Tom could barely hold a conversation. Walter had looked at him for a long time across the table, not saying anything, just looking. Then he'd nodded once, a small nod, and turned back to his plate. "There's one more thing," Evelyn said, and Tom realized the room had gone quiet again. A letter enclosed with the will, addressed to Thomas Brennan. She held up an envelope, yellowed with age, Tom's name written in Walter's careful handwriting. That slow, deliberate script that came from an era when people took time with their letters. Tom stood, his chair scraping against the wood floor. Everyone was looking at him now. He walked to the desk, took the envelope from Evelyn's extended hand. Her eyes behind those glasses were kind, or shy, he couldn't tell which. "Are you going to open it?" Dale asked. Tom didn't answer. He walked back to his chair, sat down, and slipped the envelope into his jacket pocket. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. Evelyn explained something about property transfers and taxes and what needed to be filed with the county. People started standing, thanking her, collecting paperwork. Dale was already talking to Linda about which cattle to sell, how to pay down some of the debt. Rachel was on her phone, probably calling a real estate agent about the river property. Tom stood and walked out without saying goodbye to anyone. The parking lot outside the law office was half full. Valentine, Nebraska had a population of 2,700, and most of those people lived on surrounding ranches, not in town. The main street was 3 blocks long, with a grocery store, a hardware store, a bar, a diner, and a couple of empty storefronts that used to be something but weren't anymore. Tom's car was a 2008 Honda Accord with a cracked windshield and a ding in the driver's side door that he'd never bothered to fix. It was dusty from the drive, and the interior smelled like old coffee and regret. He climbed in, closed the door, and just sat there for a minute, staring at the steering wheel. A broken tractor. 18 months ago, he'd been an engineer with a good salary, a wife, a kid who actually talked to him, a house with a mortgage he could afford. Then the bridge project collapsed, not literally, thank God, but the design failed inspection. Structural flaws that could have caused a collapse if they'd gone unnoticed. The company got sued. Heads needed to roll. Tom hadn't been the lead engineer, but his name was on enough paperwork that the lawyers decided he made a good scapegoat. Fired. Blacklisted in the industry. His reputation destroyed by a problem he hadn't caused and couldn't fix. Angela had tried to be supportive at first, but months went by and Tom couldn't find work, and the depression that had always hovered around the edges of his mind moved to the center. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating much, stopped being able to fake the smiles that made other people comfortable. Angela was a teacher, elementary school, 3rd grade. She was good at her job, loved her job, and she needed someone at home who could be a partner, not a weight. Tom understood. Even through the fog of his own misery, he understood that he was dragging her down. The divorce was amicable but not ugly. They split what little they had. She got the house with its equity. He got the debt. Ben chose to live with his mother. Tom didn't fight it. What could he offer a 13-year-old kid? A studio apartment in a bad part of Omaha and a father who could barely get out of bed. He'd seen Ben 3 times in the past year, short visits that felt like interviews with a stranger. The boy was polite but distant, answered questions with 1 or 2 words. Tom didn't blame him. What does a kid say to a father who's given up? Now here he was, 40 years old, working part-time at a Home Depot, living in a place where the landlord didn't fix the heat, and his grandfather had left him a broken tractor. He pulled the envelope from his pocket and turned it over in his hands. The paper was thick and felt expensive, not like the cheap stuff you got at Walgreens. This was old, the kind of paper that lasted. He slid his thumb under the flap and tore it open. Inside was a single sheet, folded once. Walter's handwriting filled both sides. No date at the top, just the words. "Thomas, for who you are. The only one who asked me about work instead of worth." Tom stared at the words. He had no memory of asking Walter about work. No memory of any conversation like that. But Walter wouldn't lie. If Walter said it happened, it happened. He kept reading. "The tractor isn't worth much money. If you restore it, you'll spend more than it's worth. Everyone will tell you you're foolish. But if you do it anyway, you'll understand what I'm trying to tell you. Start with the tractor. Take it apart. See how it works. See what's broken. See what can be fixed. Then decide if the work is worth it. Not if the tractor is worth it, if the work is worth it. I've watched you your whole life. You're like me. You think too much and feel too deeply and carry weight that isn't yours to carry. The tractor will teach you something if you let it, or it won't. Either way, the choice is yours. Ubi. Tom read the letter twice, then 3 times. Then he folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope and slipped it back into his pocket. He sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, feeling something he hadn't felt in months. Not happiness, not excitement, just a kind of curiosity, a question that needed an answer. What had Walter seen in him that nobody else saw? He started the car and drove out of the parking lot, not toward the highway in the long drive back to Omaha, toward the old homestead road that led out into the sandhills. He'd see the tractor with his own eyes. Then he'd know for sure he was being foolish. The road turned from pavement to gravel after 5 miles. Tom followed the directions Evelyn had written down, turning off onto a 2-track dirt path that cut through rolling hills covered in yellowing grass. This had been Walter's original homestead, the land he'd bought when he first came back from Korea in 1952. He'd built a house here, started a small herd, worked the land for 3 decades before buying the bigger place where Dale now lived. The house was gone now, burned down in 2011. All that remained was a concrete foundation and a chimney standing like a tombstone. The barn had collapsed years before that. Only the fence lines remained, rusty wire stretching across the landscape, marking boundaries that didn't matter anymore. Tom followed the tracks past the old foundation and out into what had been a pasture. The grass was tall here, ungrazed for decades. Wind rippled through it like water. The sun was getting low, casting long shadows that made the landscape look like an ocean frozen in time. He saw the tractor from 100 yards away, a dark shape sitting alone in the middle of the field. No shed or cover, just sitting there exposed to everything. He parked and climbed out, leaving the car door open. The wind was cooler out here, carrying the smell of earth and grass and something else he couldn't quite name. Openness, maybe? Space. He walked toward the tractor. The grass came up to his knees and grabbed at his pants with every step. His shoes, dress shoes he'd worn to the funeral, got soaked with dew. As he got closer, the damage became clearer. The tractor was an orange-brown color, the original paint entirely replaced by rust. The tires were flat and cracked, the rubber split open like wounds. The seat was gone entirely, just springs and a metal frame. The steering wheel was pitted with corrosion. Parts were missing altogether. Whatever could be easily removed had been stolen over the years. He walked around it slowly, taking in the details. The engine block had a visible crack. The hydraulic lines had burst and leaked out whatever was left of their fluid. The hitch at the back was corroded solid. Tumbleweeds had grown up around the wheels, as if nature was trying to pull the thing down into the earth where it belonged. This was junk. There was no other word for it. Tom started to laugh. A short, sharp sound that came out more like a cough. Of course. Of fucking course. Walter's final gift. A rusted hulk in the middle of nowhere. Worth nothing. Good for nothing. He stopped laughing and just stood there, one hand resting on the cold metal of the hood. The sun was touching the horizon now, turning the sky orange and pink and purple. The wind had died down to almost nothing. The silence out here was complete. No cars, no voices, just the whisper of grass and the distant cry of a hawk. Tom looked at the tractor again, really looked at it, and that's when he saw it. The tractor was facing west, directly west, toward the sunset, not angled, not approximate, exactly west. He walked around to the front and crouched down. The wheels were sunk into the ground from years of sitting, but the alignment was perfect. Someone had positioned this machine deliberately, aimed it like a compass. He stood and moved to the side, running his hand along the frame. The rust was rough under his fingers, catching on his skin. And then he felt something different. Not rough, smooth, carved. He leaned closer, brushing away dirt and rust flakes. There, on the steering column, barely visible under decades of corrosion, were letters, carved carefully into the metal. TB start here, 1948. Tom's heart started beating faster. TB Thomas Brennan. His initials. Start here. Start what? In 1948, the year the tractor was made. The year Walter bought it, probably. When Walter was just a kid himself. He straightened up and looked around the empty field. The sun was almost gone now, just a sliver of orange on the horizon. The shadows were deep and long. Walter had positioned this tractor, had carved these words, had left it here not as junk, but as something else. A message, a puzzle, a test. Tom pulled out his phone and took a picture of the carving, then another of the tractor from different angles. The light was fading fast, but he wanted documentation, proof that he wasn't imagining this. He walked back to his car as the last of the daylight disappeared. His shoes were ruined. His pants were covered in burrs and seeds. He didn't care. He sat in the driver's seat with the door still open and pulled out Walter's letter again. Read it by the dome light. Start with the tractor. Take it apart. See how it works. Tom looked back toward the dark shape in the field. He couldn't see it anymore in the growing darkness, but he knew it was there, waiting. The question wasn't whether he could restore it. The question was whether he would. He started the car but didn't drive toward the highway. He drove back into Valentine to the one motel on Main Street, a place called the Cattleman's Rest with a neon sign that flickered and buzzed. The clerk was a woman in her 70s who looked up from her crossword puzzle when Tom walked in. "How long you staying?" Tom hesitated. He had work in 3 days, a shift at Home Depot that he couldn't afford to miss. But something in him was pushing back against that thought, pushing back against the idea of driving back to Omaha in his empty apartment, in his empty life. "A week," he said. "Maybe longer." The woman nodded and slid a registration form across the counter. Tom filled it out, paid cash for 3 nights, and took the key to room 7. The room was small and clean and smelled like industrial detergent. A bed, a TV, a bathroom with a shower that dripped. Tom sat on the edge of the bed and called his supervisor at Home Depot. The phone rang 4 times before Mike answered. "Tom, what's up? I need some time off. Family emergency." There was a pause. Tom could hear voices in the background, the sound of the store. "How much time? 2 weeks? Maybe 3. Another pause, longer this time. "Tom, you've called out 4 times this month." "I know, I'm sorry. This is important. Everything's important with you lately. Look, I like you, but I can't hold your position if you're not here." "I understand. You're putting me in a tough spot." "I know, I'm sorry." Mike sighed. 2 weeks. That's it. After that, I gotta fill the position. "Thank you." Tom hung up and sat there holding the phone. He'd probably just lost his job, the only income he had, the thing that kept him from being completely broke. And he didn't care. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to Angela's number. His thumb hovered over it for a long moment before he pressed call. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was cautious. "Tom? Hey, is Ben around?" "He's doing homework. Is everything okay?" The funeral was today. The will reading. "Oh, how did that go?" "Walter left me a tractor." A pause. "A what?" "A tractor. Old one, 1948 Ford. It's broken down." Another pause, longer. "Tom, I don't understand." "Neither do I, but I'm going to restore it." He could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. Could imagine her standing in the kitchen of the house they used to share, the house that was hers now, trying to figure out how to respond to this. "Restore it? Tom, do you know how to do that?" "No, but I'm going to learn." "Why?" He looked at Walter's letter sitting on the nightstand. "Because I need to." Silence, then softly, "Tom, are you okay?" "I don't know, maybe not, but I think this is important." "Okay." Her voice was different now, not cautious, something else. Hopeful, maybe. "If you think it's important, then do it." "Can I talk to Ben?" Another pause. He heard muffled voices, Angela calling Ben's name. Then Ben's voice, flat and uninterested. "Yeah? Hey, buddy, how's school?" "Fine. Good. Listen, I'm in Nebraska. Grandpa Walter left me an old tractor. I'm going to fix it up. Thought maybe when summer break comes, you might want to help." Silence. Tom waited, counting his heartbeats. "I don't know anything about tractors." "Neither do I. We'd figure it out together." More silence. Tom could feel his son weighing the offer, weighing him, trying to decide if this was worth the risk of being disappointed again. "Can I think about it?" "Of course, no pressure. Just, if you want to, the offer's there." "Okay. I love you, Ben." A pause. "Yeah, bye, Dad." The line went dead. Tom set the phone down and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The textured white surface with its random patterns. The water stain in the corner that looked like a face if you squinted. He thought about the tractor sitting alone in that field. Thought about Walter carving those initials into the steering column. Thought about Ben's voice on the phone, flat and distant. "Start here," Walter had written. Okay, Tom thought, let's start. The next morning he woke at dawn, something he hadn't done in months. The depression usually kept him in bed until 10 or 11, the weight of it pressing him into the mattress like a physical thing. But today he was up, showered and dressed before the sun had fully cleared the horizon. He drove to the diner on Main Street and ordered coffee and eggs. The place was half full with ranchers and farmers, men in their 50s and 60s and 70s, wearing work boots and Carhartt jackets, talking about cattle prices and weather and machinery that needed fixing. Tom sat at the counter and listened, really listened. The way they talked about their equipment, the problems they were having, the solutions they'd found. It was a language he didn't speak but recognized somehow, the language of work, of hands-on problems and hands-on solutions. When he finished eating, he asked the waitress where he could find a machine shop. "Hank's place," she said, pointing down the street. 3 blocks that way. Can't miss it. Tom drove the 3 blocks and found it easily. A metal building with a hand-painted sign that said Hank's Machine and Welding. The parking lot was dirt, with a few trucks scattered around into a pile of scrap metal in one corner. He parked and walked to the open bay door. Inside, a man was bent over a welding table, the bright blue flash of the torch illuminating his face. He was in his 50s, with gray hair and a thick beard, wearing a leather apron over jeans and a stained t-shirt. Tom waited until the man finished his weld and lifted the hood. "Help you? I'm looking for someone who knows about old tractors." The man set down his torch and pulled off his gloves. "How old?" 1948. Ford 8N. The man's eyebrows went up. "Those are good machines, simple, reliable when they're running. You got one?" "I inherited one. It's been sitting in a field for 20 years. The man whistled low. "That's rough. What kind of shape?" "Bad. Rust everywhere? Engine's cracked. Tires are shot. Can it be restored?" The man wiped his hands on a rag and walked closer, studying Tom's face. "That's not really a mechanical question. That's a philosophical one." Tom smiled despite himself. "What do you mean?" "I mean, anything can be restored if you're willing to put in the work. Question is, are you?" "I don't know yet. That's why I'm here." The man stuck out his hand. "Hank Mercer." "Tom Brennan." They shook. Hank's grip was strong, his palm rough with calluses. "You Walter Brennan's grandson? The engineer from Omaha?" Tom felt that familiar tightness in his chest. "Yeah, how'd you know?" "Small town, word gets around. Heard about the will reading yesterday. Heard you got the old 8N. Heard it was junk." Hank shrugged. "Junk is just stuff nobody's cared for yet. You planning to care for it?" "I'm planning to try." "Then it's not junk." They stood there for a moment, the silence comfortable. "What would it take to restore it?" Tom asked. Hank scratched his beard. "Depends. You want to do it right or you want to do it fast?" "Right. Then you're looking at time more than money. Engine rebuild, new tires, new hydraulics, new wiring, paint. Parts alone, maybe 8 to 10,000. Labor, if you pay someone, another 10. But if you do it yourself, learn as you go, it's just time and patience." "I don't have $10,000. Then you got the other option. Come work with me, help out around the shop. I'll teach you what you need to know. You can use my space, my tools, work it off." Tom stared at him. "Why would you do that?" Hank smiled. "Walter was a good man, kept to himself mostly, but he was good. And I knew your dad, too, before he passed. Your family's been in this valley a long time. That means something." Tom felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been sealed tight for months. "When can I start?" "Bring the tractor here first. We'll need to haul it on a flatbed. I know a guy who can do it cheap. Once we got it in the shop, we'll assess the real damage." Tom nodded. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. This is going to be hard work. Frustrating work. You're going to want to quit about 100 times." "I'm pretty familiar with wanting to quit." Hank's expressions softened. "I heard about the bridge thing. Heard you got a raw deal." Tom looked away. "Yeah, you didn't deserve that." "No, I didn't." They stood there in the shop, surrounded by the smell of metal and oil and work. Tom could hear the tick of cooling metal somewhere in the back, the drip of water from a faucet. "You coming back from something," Hank said. It wasn't a question. Tom met his eyes, trying to. "Good. Work helps with that. Honest work, building something, fixing something. It helps." Tom nodded. He didn't trust himself to speak. "Come back tomorrow morning," Hank said. "We'll go look at the tractor together, figure out what we need for the haul." Tom shook his hand again and walked back to his car. The sun was higher now, warming the spring air. He could hear birds singing in the trees that lined the street, could smell fresh bread from the bakery 2 doors down. He pulled out his phone and texted Angela. "I'm staying in Nebraska for a while. Found someone to help with the tractor. I think this is going to be good." She responded almost immediately. "I'm glad. Keep me updated." Then another message. "Ben asked about you this morning. First time in months." Tom stared at that message for a long time, then he typed back. Tell him I'm working on something he might like. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. I will. Tom drove back to the motel and spent the rest of the day researching Ford 8N tractors. He watched YouTube videos of restorations, read forums where people discussed parts and techniques, made lists of what he'd need to learn. Welding, engine mechanics, hydraulics, electrical systems, paint and bodywork. It was overwhelming, but it was also exciting in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. That evening, he drove back out to the homestead, parked in the same spot, and walked through the tall grass to the tractor. The sun was setting again, painting the sky in those same oranges and pinks. He climbed up onto the frame where the seat used to be. The springs were rough under him. The steering wheel was cold in his hands. He sat there as the light faded, looking west, and for the first time in 18 months, Thomas Brennan felt something that might have been hope. Tomorrow he would start. Tomorrow he would begin taking this machine apart. Tomorrow he would start learning what it meant to restore something broken. But tonight he just sat with it, with Walter's ghost and his own uncertain future, and the wind moving through the grass like a whispered promise. Start here, Walter had written. So Tom did. The flatbed truck arrived at dawn, its diesel engine rumbling through the quiet streets of Valentine like distant thunder. Tom stood in the gravel parking lot of Hank's shop, coffee steam rising from the cup in his hands, watching the sun paint the eastern sky in shades of coral and gold. He'd been awake for 2 hours already, unable to sleep, his mind churning through everything that needed to happen today. Hank emerged from the shop bay, wiping his hands on a rag that might have been blue once, but was now the color of old pennies. The man who climbed down from the truck was younger than Tom expected, maybe 30, with the build of someone who moved heavy things for a living. "This is Danny," Hank said. "Best hauler in 3 counties. Danny, this is Tom Brennan. We're bringing in his grandfather's old 8N. Danny shook Tom's hand with a grip that was firm, but not aggressive. "Heard about that tractor. Been sitting out at the old homestead for what, 20 years? "About that," Tom said. "She gonna roll?" "Probably not. Wheels are seized, tires are flat." Danny nodded, unsurprised. "We'll winch her up. Done it 100 times. You guys riding with me or following?" "We'll follow," Hank said. "Want to be there in case we need to dig her out." The drive out to the homestead took 20 minutes, the flatbed moving slow and steady on the gravel roads, Tom and Hank following in Hank's pickup. They didn't talk much. Hank had the radio on low, some old country station playing songs that Tom's father used to listen to. The morning light was still soft, making the sand hills look like something from a painting, all rolling curves and infinite grass. When they reached the pasture, Danny spent 10 minutes walking around the tractor, examining it from every angle, muttering to himself. Then he backed the flatbed up as close as he could get, dropped the ramps, and started setting up the winch. Tom and Hank stood to the side watching. The tractor looked even worse in the morning light. Every flaw was visible. Every year of neglect written in rust and decay. "Second thoughts?" Hank asked quietly. Tom shook his head. "No, not anymore." "Good, because the easy part is getting her to the shop. The hard part starts after." Danny had the winch cable hooked to the front axle now, and the motor began its slow grinding pull. The tractor didn't move at first. The wheels were sunk into the ground, held by earth and root and time. But Danny knew his work. He adjusted the angle, applied more power, and gradually the tractor began to shift. Inch by inch, it came free, leaving deep furrows in the soil where the wheels had rested for 2 decades. It took 40 minutes to get the tractor onto the flatbed and secured with chains. By the time they were done, all 3 men were sweating despite the cool morning air. "She's heavier than she looks," Danny said, tightening the last chain. "All that rust adds weight." The drive back to town was slower, Danny careful with his load, Tom and Hank still following. Tom found himself watching the tractor in the truck bed ahead of them, this machine that had somehow become the center of his life in just 3 days. "What do you know about my grandfather?" Tom asked suddenly. Hank glanced over, then back at the road. "Walter? Not much more than anyone else, I guess. Quiet man, fair, worked hard his whole life. Never heard him complain about anything." "He ever talk about Korea?" "Not to me, but men who saw combat, a lot of them don't." They were quiet for a moment. Then Hank continued. "I'll tell you what I do know. When the farm crisis hit in the 80s, a lot of ranchers went under. Banks foreclosing left and right. Walter helped people. Quietly. He'd buy equipment from families who were desperate, pay more than it was worth, then sell it back to them later for $1 when they got back on their feet. Never wanted credit for it. Never wanted anyone to know. Tom felt something tighten in his throat. How do you know about it if he never told anyone? Because I was one of the families he helped. The shop felt different with the tractor inside it. More purposeful somehow. Danny had positioned it in the center of the main bay, under the big overhead lights, and now it sat there like a patient on an operating table, waiting for diagnosis. After Danny left, Hank and Tom stood looking at it for a long time without speaking. Okay, Hank finally said. First rule of restoration, document everything. You got your phone. Tom pulled it out. Take pictures, every angle, every part, every problem. You'll want to remember what it looked like before, and halfway through, when you're frustrated and tired, you'll need proof that you're making progress. Tom spent 20 minutes photographing the tractor from every conceivable angle, close-ups of the rust, wide shots showing the overall condition, detail shots of missing parts and broken components. Now, Hank said when Tom was done, we start the tear down, but before we touch a single bolt, I want you to just look at it. Really look. Understand how it's put together. See how every part relates to every other part. Tom walked around this tractor slowly, trying to see what Hank meant. The engine at the front, the transmission behind it, the hydraulic system for the rear implements. Everything connected, everything dependent on everything else. It's simple, Hank said. That's what makes these old machines beautiful. No computers, no sensors, just metal and mechanics. If something breaks, you can see why. If something works, you can understand how. They started with the easy parts. The hood, already loose, came off with minimal effort. The grille was next, then the side panels. Each piece they removed revealed more damage, more problems, more work to be done. But it also revealed the fundamental structure of the machine, the engineering that had made it functional for decades before neglect took over. By lunchtime, they'd stripped most of the body panels and exposed the engine. Tom's hands were filthy, his clothes covered in rust dust that would probably never wash out. His back ached from bending over the tractor for hours, and he felt more alive than he had in 18 months. They ate sandwiches that Hank's wife had packed, sitting on upturned buckets in the shop. Your boy, Hank said between bites. Ben, right? He coming out this summer? Tom shrugged. He said he'd think about it. Haven't heard from him since. Give him time. 13 is a hard age, especially with divorced parents. You got kids? 2, both grown now. Daughter's a nurse in Denver. Son runs a ranch up by Chadron. Don't see them as much as I'd like, but that's life. They were quiet for a moment, chewing their sandwiches. The shop silent except for the tick of cooling metal and the distant sound of traffic on Main Street. You know what the hardest part of this is going to be? Hank asked. The engine rebuild? No, that's just mechanical. The hardest part is going to be believing you can do it. Every time you hit a problem you don't know how to solve, every time a part doesn't fit right, every time something breaks when you're trying to fix it, you're going to want to quit. You're going to tell yourself you're not qualified, not skilled enough, not worthy of this project. Tom looked at the stripped-down tractor, its skeleton exposed, its brokenness impossible to ignore. How do you get past that? You don't, Hank said. You just keep working anyway. That afternoon, they tackled the engine removal. It was delicate work, disconnecting fuel lines and electrical wiring, unbolting the motor mounts, positioning the engine hoist. Hank narrated each step, explaining the why behind every action, making sure Tom understood not just what to do, but the reasoning behind it. See this bolt here? Hank pointed to a rusted fastener. Looks like it should come straight out, right? But if you force it, you'll strip the threads. What you do is hit it with penetrating oil, let it soak overnight, then use heat tomorrow to break the corrosion bond. Why not just heat it now? Because patience is part of the work. Rushing causes mistakes. Mistakes cause damage. Damage means more work later. By the time the sun started dropping toward the horizon, they disconnected everything but the actual motor mounts. The engine was ready to come out tomorrow. Tom's shoulders ached, his hands were raw, and he couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this satisfied. He drove back to the motel, showered, and was about to order takeout when his phone rang. Angela's name on the screen. Hey, he answered. Hey, how's Nebraska? Good. We got the tractor to the shop today, started taking it apart. We? Guy named Hank. Runs the machine shop. He's teaching me as we go. There was a pause on the line. Tom could hear kitchen sounds in the background. The clatter of dishes. Ben keeps asking about it, Angela said. About the tractor. About what you're doing. Yeah? He's on his laptop every night watching videos about tractor restoration. Making notes. I think he's actually interested. Tom felt his chest tighten. Can I talk to him? He's at his friend Tyler's house. But Tom, I was thinking. Spring break is in 2 weeks. What if I drove him out there? Just for a few days. Let him see what you're doing. Tom had to sit down. You do that? I can see you're trying, Angela said quietly. Really trying. And Ben needs to see that. He needs to see his dad working towards something. I don't want to disappoint him again. Then don't. Just be honest with him. Show him the work. Let him help if he wants. Don't make promises you can't keep, but don't be afraid to include him. Okay, yeah, that would be good. I'll text you the dates. Angela, thank you. Don't thank me yet. Just be there for him. That's all I'm asking. After she hung up, Tom sat on the motel bed for a long time, phone in his hands, trying to process what had just happened. Ben was coming. His son was actually coming. In 2 weeks, Tom would have to show him that this wasn't another false start, another failed project, another disappointment in a long line of disappointments. He pulled up his photos of the tractor and started scrolling through them. The before pictures, the rust and decay, the broken parts, the seemingly impossible task ahead. Then he started a new album on his phone, called it Progress. Tomorrow he'd start documenting every small victory, every part repaired, every inch of forward movement. When Ben arrived, Tom would show him not just the tractor, but the journey, the proof that broken things could be fixed. The next 2 weeks developed their own rhythm. Tom would arrive at the shop at 7 each morning. Hank was always already there, coffee brewing, the shop warm from the space heater he'd turned on an hour earlier. They'd plan the day's work, then execute it with a patience Tom was slowly learning to embrace. The engine came out the second day. 300 pounds of cast iron and rust lifted slowly on the hoist, swinging slightly as they guided it onto the workstand. With the engine out, the full extent of the damage became clear. The block had a crack, just as Tom had feared, running from one cylinder to the edge of the water jacket. Can it be fixed? Tom asked, running his finger along the crack. Hank examined it closely. Maybe. There's a guy down in North Platte who specializes in cast iron welding. We'll need to send it to him, but first we need to get it completely torn down, cleaned, inspected. They spent 3 days disassembling the engine. Each part went into a labeled bin. Each component was photographed. The crankshaft, the pistons, the valves, the camshaft. Some parts were salvageable, most weren't. But even the parts they'd have to replace taught Tom something about how engines worked, how combustion became motion, how something so simple could be so elegant. In the evenings, Tom researched parts. He discovered online forums where old tractor enthusiasts shared knowledge and sources. He found suppliers who specialized in Ford 8N components. He started a spreadsheet tracking what he'd need, what it would cost, where he could source it. The costs were adding up. Even doing all the labor himself, even with Hank's generosity with shop space and tools, Tom was looking at several $1,000s in parts. Money he didn't have. His savings account had maybe $800 in it. His credit cards were maxed out from the divorce. He was lying awake in the motel room, worrying about money, when his phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. "This is Dale. Can we talk?" Tom stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. "Sure, when?" "Now I'm at the bar on Main Street." Tom found Dale sitting in a back booth, nursing a beer, looking older somehow than he had at the will reading. There were dark circles under his eyes and his hands shook slightly when he lifted the bottle. "Thanks for coming," Dale said as Tom slid into the opposite side of the booth. "What's going on?" Dale took a long drink, then set the bottle down carefully. "I've been an asshole. To you. For years, really, but especially at the reading." Tom didn't argue. Dale continued, "I expected the ranch. Linda and I, we've lived there 15 years, worked it, put everything into it, and we got it. We got what we expected, but somehow it still feels like I'm losing." "Losing what?" Dale's laugh was bitter. "Everything. The ranch is drowning in debt. Cattle prices are shit. Feed costs are up. I'm underwater on equipment loans. I've got 2 kids trying to go to college, and I can't help them. And you got a broken tractor, and somehow you look happier than I've felt in years." Tom sat back, surprised. "I'm not happy. I'm terrified most of the time." "Of what?" "That I can't do this. That I'll fail again. That I'll disappoint my son again." That Walter made a mistake leaving me anything. But you're doing it anyway. Tom nodded. Yeah, I guess I am. Dale was quiet for a moment, peeling the label off his beer bottle. Then he said, Walter used to tell me that owning land wasn't the same as deserving it. I never understood what he meant. I thought work was work. If you put in the hours, you earned what you got. That's not what he meant? I don't think so. I think he meant that sometimes you can work hard at the wrong things, chase the wrong success, build on the wrong foundation. Tom thought about that, about his engineering career that had crumbled, about his marriage that couldn't survive his depression, about all the things he'd worked for that hadn't lasted. Why are you telling me this? Because I see you down at Hank's shop every day. I drive past on my way to deal with creditors and lawyers and all the mess I've made. And you're in there learning how to fix something, actually fix it, not just throw money at it or hope it gets better, and I'm jealous as hell. The waitress came by, and Dale ordered another beer. Tom asked for coffee. How bad is it? Tom asked when she left. The ranch, I mean. Bad. I'll probably have to sell land to stay afloat. The kids are looking at loans for school. Linda's talking about getting a job in town, which means admitting we can't make it on ranching alone. I'm sorry. Don't be. It's not your fault. It's mine. I made bad decisions, borrowed too much, expanded too fast, thought I could outwork the market. They sat in silence for a moment. The bar was quiet for a Tuesday night. Just a couple old-timers at the far end playing pool, the crack of balls against each other echoing off the walls. The tractor, Dale said. You really think you can restore it? I don't know, but I'm going to try. Walter would like that. He always said trying was more honest than succeeding. Tom had never heard that phrase before, but it sounded like something Walter would say. Look, Dale continued, I know I don't have any right to ask, but if you need help with the tractor, heavy lifting, or whatever, I'm around. I can't pay you for your time, but I could use something that feels like honest work instead of just managing decline. Tom thought about it, about extending an olive branch to a cousin who'd mocked him, about letting someone into a project that felt deeply personal, about the practical reality that there would be moments when two sets of hands were better than one. Okay, Tom said. Yeah, I'd appreciate that. Dale looked surprised, like he'd expected rejection. Really? Really. Fair warning, though, it's mostly just me learning what I don't know and making mistakes. That's more progress than I've made in 5 years. They talked for another hour, the conversation drifting from the tractor to memories of their grandfather, from the ranch's problems to Tom's divorce, from the specific to the universal ways that men their age found themselves looking at their lives and wondering where the time had gone. When Tom finally walked back to the motel, the night was cold and clear, stars visible in a way they never were in Omaha. He felt something shifting inside him. Not happiness exactly, but maybe the precondition for happiness. The sense that forward motion was possible, that change could happen, that he wasn't locked into the story his life had been telling for the past 18 months. The engine block came back from North Platte after a week. The crack had been expertly welded, the repair so clean Tom could barely see where it had been. The machinist had also resurfaced the block, cleaned out the cylinders, and inspected everything with a professional eye. It's a good block, the note included with the shipment said. Worth saving. Tom and Hank spent the next several days cleaning and inspecting every part. Some components were salvageable with just cleaning and new gaskets. Others needed to be replaced entirely. The pistons were scored beyond use. The valves were worn. The carburetor was hopeless. Tom ordered parts from 3 different suppliers, choosing carefully between original equipment, reproduction parts, and rebuilt components. Each decision was a balance of cost and quality, authenticity and practicality. While they waited for parts to arrive, they moved to other systems. The hydraulics needed a complete rebuild. The transmission was surprisingly solid once they got into it, just needing new seals and fresh oil. The electrical system was a disaster, every wire brittle and corroded, but also simple enough that Tom could understand it with Hank's help. Dale started showing up in the evenings after he'd finished whatever crisis was consuming his ranch that day. He didn't talk much, just picked up whatever task needed doing. He was good with his hands, years of ranch work having taught him practical skills that Tom was still learning. Together, they'd work until 8 or 9, then grab dinner at the diner, talking about the work they'd done and the work still ahead. Tom found himself looking forward to these evenings, the easy companionship of men working toward a shared goal, the satisfaction of visible progress, the way Dale seemed lighter somehow, less burdened, when his hands were busy with honest work. Spring break arrived faster than Tom expected. He'd been so focused on the tractor that the days had blurred together. But suddenly it was Friday, and Angela texted that they were leaving Denver at dawn, would arrive around lunch. Tom spent the morning cleaning the motel room, then realized that was stupid. He wasn't trying to impress Angela. This was about Ben, about showing his son something real and true and worth doing. He drove to the shop and looked at the tractor with fresh eyes. It looked worse than it had 2 weeks ago. Completely disassembled, every component either in bins or laid out on tables, the frame stripped bare. To someone who didn't know the story, it would look like a disaster, like a project abandoned midstream. But Tom could see the progress, the clean parts, the rebuilt systems, the careful organization, the foundation being laid for eventual reassembly. Hank found him standing there, lost in thought. Nervous? Yeah. Good. You should be. Nothing important ever feels easy. What if he doesn't get it? What if he just sees a mess? Then you show him how to see it differently. You teach him what you've learned. That's what fathers do. They arrived at noon, Angela's SUV pulling into the shop parking lot, dust settling around it in the still air. Tom walked out to meet them, wiping his hands on a rag, heart hammering in his chest. Ben climbed out slowly, looking around with a teenager's careful disinterest. But Tom could see the curiosity underneath, the way his son's eyes went to the shop, trying to see inside. Hey, buddy, Tom said. Hey, Ben replied. Angela got out, stretched, and gave Tom a small smile. Long drive. I bet. You guys want to get lunch first or see the shop? Ben answered before his mother could. Shop. Tom felt relief wash over him. Okay, come on. Inside, Ben stopped just past the door, taking it all in. The tractor in pieces, the parts on tables, the tools on the walls, the smell of oil and metal and work. This is it? This is it? Tom walked his son through the space, explaining what each component was, what they'd done so far, what still needed to happen. Ben asked questions, good questions, questions that showed he'd been doing his research. Can I see the engine? Tom led him to the workstand where the rebuilt block sat. Ben circled it slowly, examining it from every angle. You fixed the crack? A guy in North Platte did. Cast iron welding. It's a specialized skill. And all these parts, Ben pointed to the bins, they all go back together? Eventually. Once we get everything cleaned and rebuilt. When? Couple more weeks, maybe for the engine. Then we start reassembly. Ben nodded, still looking at the engine. Then he said quietly, Can I help? Tom had to swallow hard before answering. Yeah, I like that. Angela stayed for an hour talking with Hank, watching Tom and Ben work together on cleaning small parts. Then she said she needed to get to the motel, check in, maybe take a nap. I'll bring him back around 5, Tom said. No rush. I'm here through Tuesday. He's yours for the weekend. After she left, Tom showed Ben the careful process of cleaning parts in solvent, scrubbing away decades of grime and oil. It was meditative work, repetitive but important, and it gave them something to do with their hands while they talked. Or didn't talk. Sometimes they just worked in silence. And that was okay too. Dale showed up around 4, stopping short when he saw Ben. You must be Tom's son. I'm Dale, your dad's cousin. Ben shook his hand solemnly. He's told me about you. Nothing good, I hope, Dale said with a smile. He said you're helping with the tractor. When I can. Your dad is doing most of the real work, though. I'm just extra hands. They worked together for the next 3 hours. Tom showing Ben how to inspect parts for wear, how to measure tolerances, how to determine what was salvageable. Ben absorbed it all with the quick comprehension of youth, his hands learning the feel of tools and metal. At 7, Hank called it a day. Dale headed home. Tom and Ben went to the diner, slid into a booth, and ordered burgers and fries. This is cool, Ben said when the food arrived. The tractor, the shop, all of it. You think so? Yeah. It's real, you know? Like, at school, everything's theoretical. Math problems, science experiments. But this is actually building something. Tom felt something unlock in his chest. That's exactly what it is. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Then Ben said, Mom told me about your job. The bridge thing. Tom set down his burger. What did she tell you? That it wasn't your fault, but you got blamed anyway. That you've been looking for work, but nobody will hire you. That's pretty much it. Does that make you angry? Tom thought about it. It did at first. Now mostly it just makes me sad. I like that work. I was good at it. Are you good at this? The tractor restoration? I don't know yet, but I'm learning. And the learning feels good even when it's hard. Ben nodded, chewing his fries thoughtfully. I like that you're doing something hard. Why? Because you're not hiding. Mom says you were hiding for a while. In your apartment. From everything. But you're not hiding anymore. Tom had to look away, blinking hard. Your mom's pretty smart. Yeah, she is. They finished their meal, and Tom drove Ben back to the motel. Angela was in the parking lot reading a book in her car, the interior light on. He's all yours, Tom said as Ben climbed out. Angela got out too, leaving her door open. How was it? Good, Ben answered. Really good. Can I go back tomorrow? If your dad wants you. I want him, Tom said quickly. Ben went into the motel room, and Angela and Tom stood in the parking lot, the night cool around them. He's different with you now, Angela said. More engaged, more present. I'm trying to be better, for him. I can see that. And Tom, it matters. It really does. She drove away, and Tom stood there for a while watching the stars, feeling the weight of possibility settle over him like a blanket. His son was back in his life. Not completely, not like before, but it was a start. And starts were all you needed. The rest was just work. The weekend became a blur of activity. Ben was at the shop by 8 both Saturday and Sunday, eager to learn, quick to understand. Tom found himself explaining things he'd only just learned himself, and in the teaching he understood them better. They rebuilt the carburetor together, Tom reading the manual while Ben followed the instructions. They cleaned and gapped spark plugs. They organized fasteners by size and type. They started assembling the engine, carefully torquing each bolt, following the precise sequence that would ensure everything fit together correctly. Dale came by both days, bringing sandwiches for lunch, staying to help with the heavy lifting. The three of them developed an easy working rhythm. Dale's experience with equipment, Tom's engineering mind, Ben's quick hands and sharp eyes. On Sunday evening, as they were cleaning up, Ben said, I want to come back this summer. Tom looked up from the wrench he was cleaning. Yeah, for like the whole summer. Help you finish the tractor, if that's okay. Tom glanced at Angela, who was sitting on a stool by the door watching them work. She nodded slightly. That would be great, Tom said. Really great. Mom says I can stay in a motel. Or maybe there's a place with a kitchen we could rent. We'll figure it out, Angela said. The important thing is you want to be here. I do, Ben said. This is the first thing I've been excited about in a long time. That night, after taking Ben back to the motel, Tom sat in Hank's empty shop, just looking at the tractor, at what it had been and what it was becoming, at all the work still ahead and all the work already done. He pulled out his phone and took a picture, added it to the progress album. Then he scrolled back through the photos, seeing the journey in reverse, the transformation visible in 2 weeks of patient labor. His phone buzzed, a text from Ben. Thanks for today, Dad, for all of it. Tom stared at the message for a long time before typing back. Thank you for giving me another chance. The response came quickly. That's what family does. Tom sat there in the quiet shop, the tractor waiting patiently for more work, and let himself feel something he'd almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. Pure and simple and real. Walter had been right. The work was worth it. Not because of what he'd end up with at the finish, but because of what he was becoming in the doing. And the doing had only just begun. Summer arrived in Nebraska like a promise kept. The days stretched long and warm, the sandhills turning from yellow to deep green as spring rains gave way to steady sun. Ben came back the first week of June, his duffel bag packed with enough clothes for 3 months, his eyes bright with an enthusiasm Tom hadn't seen since before the divorce. They had found a small rental house on the edge of Valentine, 2 bedrooms and a kitchen that worked well enough. It was furnished with the kind of practical pieces that came with temporary housing, but Angela had sent sheets and towels, and Ben had brought posters for his room. Within a week, it felt less like a way station and more like a home. The tractor restoration had progressed in the 6 weeks since spring break. The engine was fully rebuilt now, sitting on its stand like a mechanical heart, waiting to be transplanted back into its body. Tom and Ben spent their first morning back examining it, Tom explaining each component, Ben asking questions that showed he'd been reading and learning during his time away. The crankshaft turned smooth now, Tom said, rotating it with his hand. No binding, new bearings, new seals. It should run like it did in 1948. Should? Tom smiled. Nothing's certain until you turn the key. That's what makes this interesting. They worked 6 days a week, taking Sundays off to explore the area, driving out to the Niobrara River, or up to the Fort Niobrara Wildlife Refuge. These drives gave them time to talk about things beyond the tractor, about Ben's friends back in Denver, about school starting in the fall, about the small ways their lives were being rebuilt alongside the machine they were restoring. Hank's shop became their second home. The old machinist had taken to Ben immediately, teaching him welding basics, showing him how to read a micrometer, explaining the difference between working fast and working right. Dale still came by most evenings, his ranch troubles continuing, but his demeanor lighter when he was working with his hands instead of worrying about spreadsheets and bank loans. They were reinstalling the engine on a Tuesday afternoon, the four of them guiding the heavy block back into the tractor's frame when Frank Holloway walked into the shop. Tom had seen the old rancher around town, a figure at the diner or the hardware store, but they'd never been formally introduced. Frank was in his late 60s, weathered and lean, with eyes that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing. Heard Walter's tractor was getting restored, Frank said, standing just inside the bay door. Thought I'd come see for myself. Tom straightened up, wiping his hands. Tom Brennan, this is my son Ben. Frank nodded to them both, then walked slowly around the tractor, his examination thorough and silent. He ran his hand along the frame, checked the quality of the welds they'd done on the exhaust manifold, studied the rebuild tag on the engine. You're doing it right, Frank finally said. Taking your time, using good parts. Walter would approve. You knew my grandfather as well as anyone, I suppose. Which wasn't very well. Walter wasn't much for sharing himself. Tom felt a question forming, something he'd been wondering about for weeks. Mr. Holloway, can I ask you something? Frank, and yes, you can ask. Why did Walter leave this tractor to me? Why not sell it or give it to Dale with the ranch equipment? Frank was quiet for a long moment, still looking at the tractor. Then he said, you ever wonder why this tractor was sitting in that back pasture? Why Walter moved it there 20 years ago and just left it? I figured the engine seized and he couldn't be bothered to fix it. Frank shook his head slowly. Engine didn't seize. Walter drained the fluids, disconnected the battery, and parked it there deliberately. Told me he was saving it for someone who would understand what it meant. What does it mean? Frank looked at Tom directly for the first time. That's not for me to say, but I knew Walter long enough to know he didn't do things without reason. If he left you this tractor, it's because he saw something in you that needed what this machine could teach. Before Tom could respond, Frank continued, there's something else you should know about Walter, about his past, things that might help you understand why he was the way he was. Frank pulled an old photograph from his jacket pocket and handed it to Tom. It showed two young men in military uniforms standing beside a Jeep in what looked like Korea. One of them was unmistakably Walter, younger and unweathered. The other Tom didn't recognize. That's Walter and Eugene Moss, Frank said. Korea, 1951. They served together, came home together. Eugene was Walter's best friend for about 20 years after that. Tom studied the photo. Walter looked different, more open somehow, smiling in a way Tom had never seen in his grandfather's later years. What happened to him? Ben asked, looking over his father's shoulder. Frank's expression darkened. Eugene died, 1971, right here in Valentine, bar fight that got out of hand. And Tom, your grandfather was there when it happened. The shop went very quiet. Tom could hear the tick of cooling metal, the distant sound of traffic on Main Street. What do you mean he was there? Frank walked to the workbench and sat on a stool, suddenly looking every one of his 68 years. Walter and Eugene were at the Cattleman's bar, just having drinks, talking about nothing important. Another man, drunk and aggressive, started causing problems. Eugene tried to calm him down. The situation escalated. They took it outside. Frank paused, his hands clasped together. There was a fight. Eugene got hit, went down hard, cracked his head on the curb, died 3 days later without regaining consciousness. Tom felt something cold settle in his stomach. Was Walter charged? No. The sheriff at the time, Carl Murphy, was Frank's cousin. He ruled it an accident. Witnesses said Eugene threw the first punch, that the other man was defending himself. It was all legal enough on paper. But Tom, the other man, was Walter. The revelation hung in the air like smoke. Ben looked at his father, confusion and shock on his young face. Dale had stopped working entirely, standing frozen with a wrench in his hand. My grandfather killed his best friend. It was an accident, Frank said firmly. No one who knew Walter doubted that. But accident or not, a man was dead. And Walter carried that weight every day for the rest of his life. Tom set the photograph down on the workbench, his hand not quite steady. Why are you telling me this? Because of where you found that tractor, the pasture where it was sitting, that land is part of a section Walter bought in 1979, 8 years after Eugene died. He paid too much for it, everyone said. Worthless sandhills, no good for grazing, too fragile to plow. But Walter wanted it, needed it. Told me once it was the only thing he could do that felt like penance. Tom thought about the tractor facing west, the carved initials, the deliberate positioning. What aren't you telling me? Frank stood up slowly, his joints creaking. When you finish restoring this tractor, take it out to that land, the section where you found it, walk the property lines. You'll understand then what I can't explain now. He headed toward the door, then stopped and turned back. One more thing. That land isn't just sentimental. Walter did something with it, something that matters. The deed should be with his papers. You might want to look at it closely. After Frank left, the four of them stood in uncomfortable silence. Finally, Dale spoke. I never heard any of that, about Eugene Moss or the fight or any of it. Tom looked at the tractor, seeing it differently now. Not just a machine, but a marker, a memorial, a message from a man who'd spent 50 years trying to atone for a single terrible moment. We should keep working, Tom said quietly. This doesn't change what we're doing here. But it did change things. Tom felt it in the weight of each part they installed, the significance of each repair they made. This wasn't just restoration anymore. It was archaeology, uncovering layers of meaning that had been buried beneath rust and time. That evening, after Ben had gone to bed, Tom sat at the small kitchen table in their rental house and went through the box of Walter's papers that Evelyn Price had given him. Most of it was routine, ranch records and tax documents and receipts for equipment purchased decades ago. But at the bottom, in a folder marked personal, he found what Frank had mentioned. The deed for Section 14, Township 33 North, Range 28 West. 160 acres of Sand Hills grassland, purchased in 1979 for $1,200. The deed had Walter's name on it, but there was a notation in the margin, handwritten in Walter's careful script. For Eugene, what I owed and can never repay. Beneath the deed was a thick envelope, unsealed. Inside were documents that made Tom's breath catch. Geological surveys, commissioned privately by Walter in 1985. Soil tests, water quality assessments, and a letter from the Nebraska Department of Natural Resources, dated 2015, regarding enrollment in the Nebraska Wetlands and Grasslands Conservation Program. Tom spread the documents across the table and started reading. The surveys showed exactly what Frank had said, that the land was fragile Sand Hills ecosystem, unsuitable for agricultural development. But they showed something else too. The grassland was pristine, never plowed, never grazed heavily, a rare example of original prairie in near-perfect condition. Walter had enrolled the land in a conservation easement in 2015, permanently protecting it from development. The easement agreement included annual payments to the landowner for maintaining the grassland. Tom found the payment records, $20 per acre annually. Over a decade, that was $32,000. Money that had been going into a separate account Walter had set up. An account with Tom's name on it as beneficiary. But there was more. Clipped to the conservation documents was another survey, this one dated 2018. It was from a private firm specializing in carbon credits and environmental offsets. The conclusion made Tom's hands shake as he read it. The grassland in question represents a significant carbon sequestration asset, based on soil composition and vegetative coverage. This property qualifies for premium carbon credit valuation. Estimated value in current market conditions ranges from $25,000 to $40,000 per acre for permanent conservation easement. Tom did the math 3 times, certain he was making an error, but the numbers didn't change. 160 acres times $30,000 per acre average, $4.8 million. Walter had left him land worth nearly $5 million. He sat back in his chair, stunned. This wasn't about a broken tractor at all, or rather it was about much more than that. The tractor was a test, a puzzle, a way of ensuring that whoever found this information would be someone who understood the value of work, of restoration, of caring for something beyond its immediate monetary worth. Tom picked up his phone to call Angela, then stopped. He needed to understand this fully before telling anyone. Needed to verify the information, needed to think through what this meant. He pulled out his laptop and spent the next 3 hours researching carbon credits, conservation easements, and grassland preservation programs. Everything he found confirmed what the documents suggested. Nebraska's sandhills grassland, particularly pristine never-plowed parcels, had become increasingly valuable as carbon markets developed and climate concerns grew. Walter had known. Somehow, the quiet rancher who'd spent his life working cattle and fixing fences had understood that the worthless land he'd bought as penance would become valuable, not because of what could be taken from it, but because of what it preserved. Tom finally went to bed around 2 in the morning, his mind churning. He didn't sleep well, dreams full of tractors and grassland and his grandfather's weathered face. The next morning at the shop, Tom pulled Dale aside. "I need to show you something." He spread the documents on the workbench, watching Dale's face as the rancher read through them. Dale's expression moved from confusion to shock to something that looked like despair. "Jesus Christ," Dale whispered. $5 million? Maybe, if the surveys are accurate and the carbon credit market holds. Dale sat down heavily on a stool. "I got the ranch. 1,200 acres. 200 head of cattle. Equipment worth maybe $100,000 if I could sell it, which I can't because I need it to work the place. And I'm $300,000 in debt." Tom didn't know what to say. "You got grassland worth $5 million, Dale continued, his voice flat, and a tractor worth maybe $3,000 restored. Funny how that works out." "Dale, I didn't know about this. I swear I had no idea." "I know." Dale rubbed his face with both hands. "I know you didn't. That's what makes it worse somehow. Walter planned this, knew exactly what he was doing. Left you the thing that would teach you about value while also setting you up for life. "There's something else," Tom said quietly. "The land wasn't just an investment. Read the note on the deed." Dale read Walter's handwriting. "For Eugene, what I owed and can never repay." "Frank told me the story yesterday, about Eugene Moss, about what happened." Dale looked up sharply. "Walter killed someone?" "It was an accident, a bar fight that went wrong. But Walter never forgave himself. The land was his way of trying to make it right. By giving you $5 million, by preserving something, by making sure that this one piece of earth stayed whole and untouched. The money is almost incidental." Dale stood up and walked to the door, looking out at the summer morning. Tom could see his cousin's shoulders shaking slightly, could hear the catch in his breathing. "I've spent 15 years working that ranch," Dale said without turning around. 15 years breaking my back, destroying my marriage with stress, watching my kids grow up thinking their father is a failure. And Walter was sitting on land worth millions, just letting it be grass." He turned back to Tom. "You know what the worst part is? I would have sold it. First month I owned it, I would have sold it to a developer or a fracking company or whoever offered cash. Would have called it good business, smart ranching." Tom understood then what Walter had known, that Dale would have seen the land as an asset to be liquidized, while Tom, after being broken down and rebuilt through the process of restoration, might see it as something worth preserving. "What are you going to do?" Dale asked. Tom looked at the tractor, nearly complete now, just needing final assembly and testing. "I don't know yet, but I'm going to finish this first. Then I'll go out to that land and try to understand what Walter wanted me to understand." They worked in silence for the rest of the morning, the revelation hanging between them. Ben sensed something was wrong but didn't push, just focused on the tasks Tom assigned him. By noon, they had the engine fully installed, all connections made, fluids ready to be added. Hank came over and inspected their work, nodding approval. "She's ready for first start. You want to do it now or wait?" Tom looked at Ben. "What do you think?" "I think we should make sure everything's right first. Double-check every connection. Do it properly." "Smart kid," Hank said. "Always measure twice, cut once. Or in this case, check twice, start once." They spent the afternoon going over every system. The fuel lines were properly connected and sealed. The electrical system was functional, new wiring running to the battery and starter. The cooling system was filled and bled of air. The oil was fresh, the filter new. Everything was as right as they could make it. Frank showed up around 4, somehow knowing this was the day. He stood quietly by the door watching them work, his presence both comforting and unsettling. "Tomorrow," Tom decided. "Tomorrow morning we'll try to start it. Give us tonight to make sure we haven't forgotten anything." That evening, Tom took Ben out to the homestead. They drove in silence, the summer sun low in the sky, casting everything in amber light. When they reached the pasture where the tractor had sat, Tom parked and they got out. "This is where you found it?" Ben asked. "This is where Grandpa Walter left it, 20 years ago. waiting for someone who'd care enough to fix it. They walked out into the grass, following the faint depression where the tractor had rested. Tom showed Ben where the wheels had sunk into the earth, where the metal had left its mark. "There's something I need to tell you," Tom said, "about this land, about what Walter left us." He explained everything Frank had told him about Eugene Moss, about the fight and the death and the 50 years of guilt, about the conservation easement and the carbon credits and the value that had accrued to land that looked worthless. Ben listened without interrupting, his young face serious in the fading light. "So we're rich?" he finally asked. "Maybe, if we sell the conservation easement. But Ben, that's not what this is about." "What is it about?" Tom looked out across the grassland, the rolling hills stretching to the horizon. "I think Walter was trying to teach me that some things shouldn't be measured in money, that preserving something matters more than profiting from it, that work has value beyond its financial return." "Do you believe that?" Tom thought about the past 3 months, about learning to weld and rebuild engines and understand hydraulic systems, about the satisfaction of fixing something broken, about the relationship with his son that had been restored alongside the tractor. "Yeah, I think I do." "What are you going to do with the land?" "I don't know yet, but I know I need to finish the tractor first, need to see it run, need to complete what Walter started." They stood there as the sun set, father and son, both thinking about choices and values and the weight of inheritance that came not in the form of money but of responsibility. That night, Tom dreamed of Walter. His grandfather stood beside the tractor in the pasture, young and healthy, the way he looked in the photograph with Eugene Moss. He didn't speak, just pointed west toward the sunset, then down at the ground beneath his feet. Tom woke before dawn, the dream still vivid in his mind. He lay in the dark rental house, listening to Ben's quiet breathing from the other room, thinking about the day ahead. The tractor would either start or it wouldn't. The engine they'd so carefully rebuilt would either fire to life or reveal some flaw they'd missed. But regardless of the outcome, the work had been worth doing. Tom knew that now with a certainty that surprised him. He got up and made coffee, sitting at the kitchen table as the eastern sky began to lighten. When Ben emerged, still half asleep, Tom was ready. "Today's the day." The shop was cool when they arrived, the early morning air not yet warmed by the summer sun. Hank was already there, had been there probably since 6, checking and rechecking everything one final time. Dale pulled up as they were adding the last of the fluids. He looked like he hadn't slept, dark circles under his eyes, but he managed to smile when he saw them. "Wouldn't miss this." Frank arrived last, his old Chevy truck rattling into the parking lot. He carried a small paper bag that he set on the workbench. "What's that?" Tom asked. "Whiskey. The good stuff. For after. Whether she starts or not, we're drinking to Walter." They gathered around the tractor. Tom climbed into the seat they'd reupholstered, his hands on the steering wheel that had been stripped and refinished. The dashboard instruments, cleaned and tested, sat before him. The key, a new one cut to match the old pattern, waited in the ignition. Ben stood by the front wheel, his phone ready to record. Hank was by the engine, ready to listen for any problems. Dale and Frank stood back, giving them space but present for the moment. Tom took a deep breath. "Okay, here we go." He turned the key. The starter motor engaged, a grinding mechanical sound that seemed too loud in the quiet shop. The engine turned over once, twice, 3 times. Tom kept his foot off the gas pedal, letting the starter do its work, just as Hank had taught him. On the 4th revolution, something caught, a compression stroke that felt different. The engine coughed, a puff of blue smoke from the exhaust. Then it died. "Again," Hank called out. Tom turned the key again. The starter spun. The engine rotated. Cough, sputter, smoke. Almost. "Third time's the charm," Dale said. Tom turned the key. This time the engine caught on the 2nd revolution. Coughed, nearly died, then suddenly roared to life. The sound was incredible, a mechanical symphony of combustion and motion, the deep throb of the 4-cylinder engine settling into a steady rhythm. Ben was jumping, his phone forgotten, pure joy on his face. Dale was clapping, his earlier despair momentarily forgotten. Hank was grinning like a proud father. Frank just nodded slowly, his eyes bright. Tom sat in the seat, his hands still on the wheel, feeling the vibration of the engine through the entire machine. The tractor was alive. After months of work, countless hours of learning and effort and patience, the tractor ran. He let it idle for 5 minutes, watching the gauges, listening to the engine, checking for leaks or problems. Everything was perfect. The oil pressure was good, the temperature was rising normally, the charging system was working. Finally, Tom shut it down. The engine died reluctantly, a few final compressions, then silence. That, Hank said into the quiet, was beautiful. Frank pulled out the whiskey and 5 small glasses he'd brought with the bottle. He poured a measure in each, handing them around. To Walter, Frank said, raising his glass, who understood that the work was the point. To Walter, they echoed. The whiskey burned going down, but it felt right. Ceremonial, the marking of a moment that mattered. Now what? Ben asked. Now, Tom said, we finish it. Paint, new tires, final details. Make it look as good as it runs. And then, Tom thought about the land waiting out in the sandhills, about the decision he still needed to make, about the legacy Walter had left him and the responsibility that came with it. Then we find out what Walter really wanted to teach me. The next 2 weeks were a blur of final work. They sanded and primed and painted the tractor in the original Ford colors, a rich blue that gleamed like water. They installed new tires, proper vintage rubber that had cost more than Tom wanted to think about. They detailed every surface, chrome polished, gaskets sealed, every bolt torqued to specification. The tractor transformed from a mechanical restoration to a showpiece. It looked factory fresh, as if it had just rolled off the assembly line in 1948. Yet it carried all the knowledge of its years, the wisdom built into metal that had been broken and carefully repaired. On a Saturday morning in late June, they rolled the completed tractor out of the shop for the first time. The Nebraska sun caught the paint, making it glow. The chrome sparkled. The engine, when Tom started it, sounded like music. A small crowd had gathered, word having spread through Valentine that Walter Brennan's old tractor was finished. People who'd known Walter, people who'd seen the tractor in its years of decay, people who just appreciated the craft of restoration. They stood in the parking lot, admiring the work, asking questions, sharing stories. An old-timer Tom didn't know approached him. I remember when Walter first bought this tractor. 1948. I was just a kid, but I remember thinking it was the most beautiful machine I'd ever seen. You've brought that back. He'd be proud. Tom felt tears prick his eyes. He hoped it was true. That afternoon, Tom loaded the tractor onto the trailer Dale had borrowed. They were taking it out to the homestead, to the land where it had sat for 20 years. Tom needed to see it there, needed to complete the circle. Ben rode with Tom. Dale and Hank followed in their trucks. Frank met them at the homestead, having gone ahead to open the gates. They unloaded the tractor in the same pasture where Tom had first seen it, positioning it facing west, just as Walter had left it. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grass. Everything was golden and perfect. Tom climbed into the seat and started the engine. It fired immediately, settling into that familiar rhythm. He put it in gear and began to drive slowly across the pasture and onto the open grassland. The others followed on foot, Ben running alongside, the men walking behind. Tom drove for half a mile out to where the land rose slightly, giving a view across the entire section. Here he stopped, shut off the engine, and climbed down. From this vantage point, the sandhills stretched in every direction, grass and sky meeting at a distant horizon. The land was exactly as it had been for thousands of years, untouched, preserved, whole. Tom understood finally what Walter had seen. This wasn't about money, it was about stewardship, about being entrusted with something precious and having the wisdom to leave it alone. He pulled out his phone and called Evelyn Price. Evelyn, it's Tom Brennan. I need your help with something. The land Walter left me, I want to make sure it's protected forever. Can you help me set up the paperwork? There was a pause on the line. You're not selling it. No, I'm keeping it exactly as it is. Tom could hear the smile in her voice. Walter knew what he was doing when he left it to you. After he hung up, Frank approached. You've made your decision. I have. This land stays as grass, forever. And the money? The carbon credits could still generate income. Tom thought about it. Whatever income comes from keeping it preserved, I'll use it to help other people protect their land. Create a fund, Walter's name on it. Make something good come from his guilt. Frank nodded slowly. He'd like that. Eugene would too. They stood together as the sun dropped toward the horizon. 5 men in a restored tractor, all of them silent in the face of something that felt sacred. Ben was the first to speak. Dad, can I say something? Of course. I'm proud of you. For this, for all of it. Tom put his arm around his son's shoulders. I'm proud of us. We did this together. As the last light faded, Tom started the tractor one more time. The engine roared to life, strong and sure, the sound carrying across the empty grassland. He drove it slowly back toward the trailer, the others walking alongside. Nobody in a hurry to let the moment end. The tractor was finished. The work was done. But Tom knew it was also just beginning. The restoration of the machine had been preparation for the real work. The harder work of being a steward of land and legacy, and the responsibility that came with understanding what really mattered. Walter had given him more than a tractor. He'd given him a way back to himself, to his son, to a life that meant something beyond paychecks and professional success. And Tom finally understood what his grandfather had known all along, that some inheritances can't be measured in money, only in the work they require, in the wisdom they teach, in the legacy they preserve for those who come after. The broken tractor had taught him that, and now, restored and running, it stood as proof that anything broken could be made whole again with patience and care and the willingness to do the work. Even a man who thought he was beyond repair, especially a man like that. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late July, thick and formal in its expensive envelope. Tom was teaching Ben how to set valve clearances on the completed tractor when Hank called him to the office. A courier stood waiting, clipboard in hand, looking out of place in his pressed suit. "Thomas Brennan?" Tom wiped his hands on a rag, left oil smears on the paper as he signed. The courier left without a word, his shoes clicking on the concrete floor. The return address read Chamberlain, Ross and Associates, Denver, Colorado. Tom didn't recognize the name, but something about the weight of the envelope made his stomach tighten. He opened it standing there, Hank and Ben watching from the doorway. "Dear Mr. Brennan, we represent Patricia Moss regarding property formerly owned by Walter Edward Brennan, deceased. It has come to our attention that you have taken possession of land described as Section 14, Township 33 North, Range 28 West, purchased by Mr. Brennan in 1979. Our client asserts that this property was acquired with funds that rightfully belong to the Moss family estate, and that the notation on the deed constitutes an acknowledgement of debt that has never been satisfied." Tom read the paragraph 3 times. Each time the words became sharper, more threatening. "We hereby demand that you cease any plans to dispose of said property or its associated mineral and carbon credit rights until this matter can be properly resolved. Failure to comply will result in immediate legal action seeking both injunctive relief and monetary damages in excess of $5 million. The letter went on for 2 more pages, dense legal language that Tom's engineering mind struggled to parse. But the message was clear. Someone was coming for the land. Someone with lawyers who knew how to make threats that sounded legitimate. "What is it?" Ben asked quietly. Tom handed him the letter, watched his son's face change as he read. Hank came over, read it over Ben's shoulder, his expression darkening. "This is extortion," Hank said flatly. "They're trying to scare you into settling." "Are they wrong?" Tom asked. "About the notation on the deed?" Hank was quiet for a moment. "That's a question for Evelyn." Tom called the lawyer from Hank's office. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice immediately concerned. "Tom, I just received a courtesy copy of the same letter. I was about to call you. Can they do this?" Evelyn took a long breath. "The notation Walter made complicates things. By writing that the land was for Eugene Moss, Walter created what could be interpreted as an acknowledgement of debt. If they can argue that debt was never satisfied and was deliberately concealed, they might have standing despite the statute of limitations." Tom felt the walls of the small office pressing in. What happens if they win? If they get a judgment that the land should have gone to Moss's heirs, you could be forced to transfer the property or pay its current value. "We're talking about $4 to $5 million, Tom, money you don't have. Can we fight it? We can. But litigation like this is expensive. Tens of thousands in legal fees at minimum, and there's no guarantee we'd win. The notation on the deed is problematic. Walter's intent isn't clear enough." After the call ended, Tom sat in Hank's office chair, staring at nothing. Ben came in, sat in the other chair, waited. "What do we do?" Ben finally asked. "I don't know yet." That night, Tom couldn't sleep. He lay in bed in the rental house, staring at the ceiling, his mind churning through scenarios. Lose the land, declare bankruptcy, start over with nothing. He'd been nothing 6 months ago, but somehow the thought of being nothing again felt worse. He'd tasted what it meant to have purpose, to matter, to build something. Losing it would be like dying after being brought back to life. At 2 in the morning, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown Denver number. "Mr. Brennan, This is Patricia Moss. I know about the letter. I need to speak with you. Please call me. Tom stared at the message for a long time before calling. She answered immediately, her voice tight. Mr. Brennan, thank you for calling. I'm sorry about the letter. My husband's law firm, they moved forward before I could stop them. Your husband? Richard Chamberlain, senior partner at the firm. When I told him about the land, about what I'd discovered about my father's death, he saw dollar signs, insisted we had a claim. I tried to tell him I just wanted to understand what happened, but he wouldn't listen. Tom felt a flicker of something. Not hope exactly, but possibility. What do you want, Ms. Moss? I want to know who my father was. I was 7 when he died. My mother moved us away right after. Never spoke about him again. It wasn't until she passed last year that I found old letters, documents, started asking questions, learned he died in Valentine, that your grandfather was involved. It was an accident, a bar fight that went wrong, so I've been told. But Mr. Brennan, I've spent 40 years with a hole where my father should be. No memories, no stories, just absence. When I found out about that land, about Walter's notation, Richard convinced me it meant Walter owed us something. But I don't want money. I want to understand why my father's best friend spent 45 years protecting a piece of grassland in his memory. Tom closed his eyes, thinking about Frank's stories, about Walter's guilt, about the weight of carrying someone's death for half a century. Come to Nebraska this weekend. I'll show you the land. We'll talk about your father. Figure this out face to face. Richard will never allow that. He'll say, you're trying to manipulate me. Is he right? No, but he won't believe that. Then come anyway. This is about your father, not about your husband's law firm. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Okay, I'll come. But Mr. Brennan, you need to understand, Richard is very good at what he does, and he's convinced we can win this. If I can't persuade him to drop the case, he'll pursue it with or without my support. Why would he do that without you? Because I signed in papers giving the firm power of attorney to pursue the claim on my behalf. I didn't understand what I was signing. By the time I did, it was too late. Tom felt cold. So even if you want to drop this, he can keep going. I'm trying to undo it. But it takes time, legal process. In the meantime, yes, he can proceed. How long do I have? His letter gave you 30 days to respond. After that, he'll file suit. Once that happens, everything gets more complicated. 30 days. Tom did the math. The state fair was in 3 weeks. The foundation's first annual meeting was scheduled for 4 weeks out. Everything he'd built could come crashing down just as it was starting to matter. I'll see you this weekend, Tom said. After hanging up, he walked out onto the small porch, sat in the darkness listening to the Nebraska night, cicadas singing, distant dog barking, the sound of his own heartbeat too loud in his ears. Ben's door opened. His son came out in pajama pants and a t-shirt, sat down beside him without a word. Couldn't sleep either? Tom asked. Been watching you through the window. You look scared. I am scared. Are we going to lose everything? Tom wanted to lie, to reassure, to promise it would be okay. But Ben was old enough for truth now. I don't know. Maybe. Is that lady, Patricia Moss, is she trying to hurt us? I don't think so. I think she's caught up in something her husband started. But Ben, even if she wants to stop it, he might not let her. That's not fair. No, it's not. They sat in silence, father and son, both thinking about fairness and justice, and how little those concepts mattered when lawyers got involved. What would great-grandpa Walter do? Ben asked. Tom thought about that. Walter would face it. Whatever came, he'd stand up and face it. That's what he did for 50 years. Carried the weight and kept moving forward. Then that's what we do too. Tom put his arm around his son's shoulders. Yeah, that's what we do too. The next morning, Tom called Dale. His cousin answered on the third ring, sounding tired. It's Tom. We need to talk about the Moss lawsuit. I heard. Word travels fast in a small town. How bad is it? Bad. They're claiming Walter owed the Moss family the land. Might be able to force me to give it up or pay them millions I don't have. Dale was quiet for a long moment. Tom, if you lose the land, what happens to the foundation? It collapses. Everything we've built, the grants, the conservation programs, all of it gone. Jesus. The despair in Dale's voice was palpable. I just got my first grant approved, was going to start the transition next month. If the foundation disappears, I'm back to where I started. I know, I'm sorry. Don't apologize, this isn't your fault. But Tom, we have to fight this, not just for you, for everyone who's counting on the foundation, for the land itself. Patricia Moss is coming this weekend. I'm going to show her the grassland, try to make her understand what Walter was doing. And if she doesn't, then I guess I find out what it's like to lose everything twice. After the call, Tom stood in the shop looking at the tractor, this machine he and Ben had spent 3 months bringing back to life. The blue paint gleamed under the shop lights, every surface perfect, every system functioning. It sat there like a promise that broken things could be fixed. But what if some things couldn't be fixed? What if some problems didn't have solutions, just consequences you had to live with? Hank found him standing there, lost in thought. You okay? Tom shrugged. Been better. This lawsuit, it's got you spinning. Walter spent 50 years making something right. I've had 6 months and I'm already losing it. Hank walked over, stood beside the tractor, ran his hand along the fender. You know what Walter would say if he were here? What? That the land was never the point. The work was the point. What you learned, how you changed, that can't be taken away by lawyers. Tom wanted to believe that, but it felt like hollow comfort in the face of very real consequences. Patricia Moss arrived Saturday afternoon driving a rental car alone. She was in her late 50s, with dark hair streaked gray and eyes that carried years of unanswered questions. Tom met her in the parking lot of her motel, noticed the wedding ring she wasn't wearing. Thank you for coming. She nodded, didn't smile. My husband threatened divorce if I made this trip, so here I am. I'm sorry. Don't be. This has been coming for a long time. The lawsuit was just the catalyst. They drove out to the homestead in Tom's truck, the Nebraska summer day hot and bright. Patricia looked out the window at the rolling hills, her expression unreadable. My father grew up in Wyoming, she said suddenly. Cattle ranch. He used to tell my mother stories about the grassland, how it went on forever, how you could see weather coming from 50 miles away. She said he never adjusted to city life after the war. Always wanted to get back to open country. Walter knew that, Tom said. That's why he bought this land. It's what your father loved. Patricia turned to look at him. How do you know what my father loved? He died when I was 7. I barely remember him. Frank Holloway knew him. They were friends, the 3 of them. Walter and Eugene and Frank. After Eugene died, Frank kept his memory alive. He told me stories about your father, about who he was. What was he like? Tom thought about Frank's words, about the man in the old photograph. Loyal, funny, loved open spaces. He and Walter were closer than brothers. When he died, Walter lost half of himself. They reached the pasture, parked where Tom had first seen the tractor. Patricia got out slowly, walked into the grass, her hands trailing through the stems. The wind moved around her, carrying the scent of earth and growing things. Tom showed her the property boundaries, explained the conservation easement, the carbon credit programs, the foundation they'd started. He showed her where the tractor had sat for 20 years, told her about the restoration, about what he'd learned. Patricia listened without interrupting, her eyes scanning the horizon, taking in the vastness. When they reached the memorial stone, she stopped, read the inscription, knelt down and traced the letters of her father's name with her fingers. She stayed like that for a long time, Tom standing back to give her space. When she finally stood, her cheeks were wet with tears. He would have loved this, the protection, the preservation, the idea that some greedy developer couldn't turn it into subdivisions or strip malls. That's what Walter spent 45 years preventing. Patricia turned to face him. Mr. Brennan, Tom, I'm going to try to stop this lawsuit, but you need to understand how hard that's going to be. Richard has already spent $50,000 in legal fees. He expects to get that back and more. He's not going to walk away easily. What if you can't stop him? Then you're going to need a better lawyer than the one you have. And you're going to need evidence that Walter's intent was clear, that he meant the land as a memorial, not as payment of a debt. I have his letters, his journals. That might not be enough. The notation on the deed undermines everything else. It's the smoking gun Richard will use. They stood at the memorial as the sun climbed higher, the grasslands stretching endlessly around them. Tom felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down. Fight and possibly lose everything. Settle and betray Walter's legacy. No good options, only varying degrees of failure. What would you do, Tom asked, if you were me? Patricia looked out across the land, her expression distant. I'd fight, not because I'd win, but because some things are worth losing for. My father loved places like this. If he knew someone was protecting grassland in his memory, he'd want them to keep fighting, even if it cost everything. Even if it cost you $5 million? She smiled sadly. I don't need $5 million. I need to know my father's death meant something, that his friend's guilt turned into something beautiful. That's worth more than any settlement. Will you testify to that if it goes to trial? If Richard will let me. But Tom, he controls the case now. I'm just the client. And clients don't always get what they want. Tom drove back to the motel as the afternoon faded toward evening. They'd spent 4 hours walking the land, talking about Eugene and Walter and the strange ways that inheritance works. By the time he dropped her off, something had shifted. Not solved, but acknowledged. They weren't adversaries. They were two people caught in the machinery of other people's decisions. I'm going back to Denver tomorrow, Patricia said as she got out of the truck. I'll do everything I can to stop this. But Tom, prepare for the worst. Richard doesn't lose. It's why he's successful, and he sees this case as already won. Thank you for coming, for trying. Thank you for showing me my father's memorial, for helping me understand. She walked into the motel and Tom drove back to Valentine as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. When he got home, Ben was waiting on the porch. How did it go? Tom sat down beside his son. She's on our side, but her husband isn't, and he's the one driving the lawsuit. So nothing changed. No, nothing changed. They sat in the gathering darkness, both knowing that in 3 weeks the 30-day deadline would expire. After that, lawyers would file papers, judges would set hearing dates, and the machinery of the legal system would start grinding forward, indifferent to who it crushed. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Tom met with Evelyn 3 times, going over documents, building a defense, trying to find something that would definitively prove Walter's intent. They had letters, journals, the memorial stone, 45 years of conservation. But they also had that notation on the deed. For Eugene, what I owed and can never repay. 6 words that could cost Tom everything. Dale stopped by the shop every evening, helping with small projects, trying to distract Tom from the mounting pressure. They didn't talk about the lawsuit much. Didn't need to. It hung over everything like smoke. On Thursday, 10 days before the deadline, Patricia called. Richard filed for divorce. I'm moving out this weekend. I'm sorry. Don't be. I should have done it years ago. But Tom, this means he has nothing holding him back now. He's going to pursue this case with everything he has, not because he believes in it, but because I defied him. This is revenge, not justice. Can you still testify? He'll fight it, claim spousal privilege, conflict of interest, anything to keep me off the stand. But my lawyer thinks we can get around it. Just, it's going to be ugly. It's already ugly. She laughed bitterly. True, okay, I'll keep you updated. And Tom, I found something in some old boxes, letters my father sent my mother from Korea. One of them mentions Walter. Mentions working on a tractor together. It might help establish their relationship. I'm sending copies to your lawyer. Every little bit helps. After hanging up, Tom walked out to where the tractor sat in the shop. He climbed into the seat, sat there with his hands on the wheel, the metal cold and solid under his palms. Ben found him like that, sitting motionless in the silent shop. Dad? I was just thinking, what if Walter left me the tractor knowing this would happen? Knowing someone would eventually come for the land? Why would he do that? Tom thought about it. Because he wanted me to understand what it cost him. Carrying Eugene's death. Protecting that land. Making choices that looked wrong to everyone else. Maybe the lawsuit is part of the lesson. Learning that doing right doesn't always end well. That's a pretty dark lesson. Walter carried a pretty dark burden. The deadline arrived on a Friday, exactly 30 days after the first letter. Tom spent the morning working with Ben on a small restoration project, trying to keep his hands busy while his mind spun. At noon, Evelyn called. They filed. Just came through on the electronic court system. Moss versus Brennan, Federal District Court. They're seeking declaratory judgment that the land should have passed to Moss heirs, plus damages for the carbon credits that have been collected so far. How much are they asking for? $5.2 million. Tom felt the number hit him like a physical thing. He had maybe $12,000 in the bank. The house he and Angela owned in Denver had sold, but the proceeds had gone to paying off the mortgage and divorce debts. He owned nothing worth $5 million except the land they were trying to take. When's the first hearing? 2 weeks. Judge will set a schedule for discovery, motions, trial date. This is going to take months, Tom. Maybe over a year, and every month you'll be paying legal fees you can't afford while they're trying to destroy everything you built. Tom hung up and sat in Hank's office, staring at nothing. This was how it ended then. Not with acceptance or understanding, but with a lawsuit that would grind him down until there was nothing left to fight with. Ben appeared in the doorway. I heard. Evelyn called the shop line too. Tom nodded. There has to be something we can do. I don't know what. We tell the truth, hope the judge sees it our way. But Patricia's right. The notation on the deed makes it hard. What if we settle? Give them some of the money. That's probably where this ends up. But Ben, any settlement will bankrupt the foundation. We won't have resources to help other families. Everything we've started will stop. So we fight, and probably lose. Ben came into the office, sat down in the other chair. Dad, you've told me 100 times that the work is the point, not the outcome. That restoration is about the journey. Maybe this is the same thing. We fight because it's right, not because we'll win. Tom looked at his son, 15 years old and already wiser than Tom had been at 40. When did you get so smart? I learned from a pretty good teacher. That evening, the community gathered at the diner. Word had spread about the lawsuit, about the threat to the foundation, about Tom's situation. Dale was there, Frank, Hank, a dozen ranchers who'd been helped by the foundation or were hoping to be. People Tom had met over the summer, people who become friends. They weren't there to solve anything. There was nothing to solve, but they were there and somehow that mattered. Showing up, standing together, acknowledging that some fights weren't fought alone. Frank, moving slowly now, his age showing more each day, pulled Tom aside. Walter dealt with lawyers too, when they were trying to take his ranch during the farm crisis. Creditors circling, banks threatening, he told me something then that stuck with me. What did he say? That lawyers deal in money and property, but they can't touch what matters. Can't take your skills or your integrity or the lessons you've learned. And they can't undo the work you've already done, the land you've already protected, the families you've already helped. That's permanent. That's real. Tom felt his throat tighten. Even if I lose the land, especially if you lose the land, because then everyone will know you weren't doing it for profit. You were doing it because it mattered. The state fair came 2 weeks later, in the middle of the legal chaos. Tom hadn't planned to enter the tractor. The restoration felt like it belonged to a different life now, a life before lawsuits and lawyers and the threat of losing everything. But Ben insisted. We worked too hard not to show her off. Besides, people need to see what we built, need to remember why we're fighting. So they loaded the tractor onto Dale's trailer and made the drive to Lincoln. The fairgrounds were crowded, the antique machinery barn filled with pristine restorations. Tom's Ford 8N looked like it belonged, gleaming under the lights, every detail perfect. The judges spent 20 minutes examining it, asking questions, taking notes. Tom answered mechanically, his mind elsewhere, on court dates and depositions and the growing legal bills Evelyn kept apologizing for. The awards ceremony was that evening. Tom sat with Ben and Dale and Hank, not expecting anything, just going through the motions. When they called his name for Best of Show, he almost didn't register it. Ben grabbed his arm. Dad, you won. Tom walked to the stage in a daze, accepted the ribbon and plaque and envelope containing a check. The judge said something about quality and dedication in honoring the past. Tom nodded, smiled for the photograph, walked back to his seat. Later, standing by the tractor as people came to congratulate him, Tom felt a disconnect. This machine that had saved his life, taught him what mattered, brought his son back to him. It sat here perfect and complete while his world crumbled around him. A man approached, older, distinguished, with sharp eyes that took in everything. He handed Tom a business card. Paul Morrison, Environmental Law. I specialize in conservation cases. Heard about your situation. I'd like to help. Tom looked at the card. I can't afford another lawyer. Morrison smiled. I don't need your money. I need a case that matters. This foundation you started, the land you're protecting, it's exactly what we should be doing nationwide. If I can help preserve it by winning your lawsuit, that's payment enough. Why would you work for free? Because I'm 72 years old and rich and bored, and because your grandfather's story reminds me why I became a lawyer in the first place. Not to make money, to do something that mattered. Tom felt something he hadn't felt in weeks. Hope, small and fragile, but real. You understand we might lose? Morrison nodded. Of course. But Mr. Brennan, even if we lose, we'll make them work for it. We'll tell Walter's story, Eugene's story, your story. We'll make it mean something. When can you start? Already have. I've been reading the court filings. Your current lawyer is good, but she's out of her depth. This case needs someone who understands both property law and conservation policy. That's me. Tom shook his hand. Okay, yes, thank you. After Morrison left, Ben appeared beside him. Who was that? Tom smiled, the first genuine smile in weeks. That was Walter, still helping from the grave. The legal battle intensified over the next month. Morrison took over the case, brought in associates from his former firm, built a defense that was comprehensive and sophisticated. He found precedents, expert witnesses, environmental impact studies. He turned the case from a simple property dispute into a question about conservation policy and public good. But Richard Chamberlain was good too. He countered every motion, challenged every witness, turned every piece of evidence back on itself. The notation on the deed remained the centerpiece of his case, Walter's own words, used against his legacy. The trial date was set for November, 4 months away, 4 months of legal warfare that was draining Tom emotionally, even though Morrison was covering the costs. Tom tried to focus on the work. The foundation continued operating, though every grant they approved felt like it might be the last. He and Ben took on new restoration projects, kept teaching apprentices, maintained the rhythm of their days. But the lawsuit hung over everything, a storm cloud that never quite broke. In October, a month before trial, Patricia Moss did something unexpected. She filed a motion to intervene in the case, to be added as a party despite her husband's objections. Morrison had advised her, helped her find representation, built the legal framework. The judge allowed it. Suddenly the case was more complicated. Patricia Moss supporting Tom Brennan, Richard Chamberlain in representing the Moss estate interests, but opposed by the only living child of Eugene Moss. The newspapers picked up the story. What had been a regional curiosity became a national interest piece. The grandson restoring his grandfather's tractor and protecting land in memory of a man killed 40 years ago. The daughter supporting that protection instead of taking the money. The husband fighting both of them. The legal community watched. This was rare. This was interesting. This was the kind of case that made law review articles and set precedents. Tom hated every minute of the attention. The trial began on a cold November morning, the Lincoln Courthouse imposing in gray stone. Tom walked up the steps with Ben on one side, Angela on the other. She'd driven from Denver the night before, said she wouldn't miss this. Dale was there. Hank. Frank, moving with a cane now but determined. Patricia, with her own lawyer, taking a seat on Tom's side of the courtroom. Across the aisle, Richard Chamberlain sat with his legal team, 4 lawyers in expensive suits, briefcases full of documents. The trial took 3 days. Morrison called witnesses who spoke to Walter's character, his 50 years of conservation, his clear intent. Patricia testified about her father, about what the land meant to his memory, about wanting preservation instead of profit. Tom testified about the restoration, the lessons learned, the foundation's work. Chamberlain was ruthless. He attacked every piece of evidence, questioned every motive, turned every statement into something suspicious. He made Walter sound like a man hiding assets, made Tom sound opportunistic, made the whole foundation sound like a scheme to avoid paying a legitimate debt. On the final day, Morrison gave his closing argument. He spoke for 40 minutes, weaving together Walter's guilt and Eugene's memory and Tom's transformation and the land's preservation into a story that made sense. That felt true. That honored everyone involved. Chamberlain responded with precision and logic, stripping away emotion, focusing on the notation on the deed, on legal precedent, on the clear acknowledgement of debt that had never been satisfied. The judge, a woman in her 60s with gray hair and sharp eyes, listened to everything, took extensive notes, asked pointed questions. Then she adjourned for deliberation. The waiting was worse than the trial. Days stretched into a week, then 2. Tom tried to work but couldn't focus, tried to plan but couldn't see past the verdict. Everything hung suspended, his future unwritten, dependent on one person's decision. Ben handled it better, staying busy with projects, keeping the shop running, being the stable center when Tom felt like he was falling apart. On a Friday afternoon, 3 weeks after the trial ended, Evelyn called. Judge issued her ruling. It's on the court website. And, Tom, you need to read it yourself. I'll be at the shop in 10 minutes. Tom pulled up the court website on Hank's computer, found the case, downloaded the 16-page decision. His hands shook as he started reading. Ben stood behind him, reading over his shoulder. Hank hovered by the door. The opinion began with a thorough recitation of facts, then moved into legal analysis. The notation on the deed was indeed problematic, but taken in context with 50 years of conservation activity, with Walter's clear pattern of protecting the land, with the memorial stone erected before his death, with the totality of evidence about his intent, the court found that the notation was explanatory rather than promissory. Walter was explaining why he'd bought the land, not promising to transfer it. The court acknowledged the complexity of the case, noted that reasonable people could disagree, but ultimately found that Tom had demonstrated by clear and convincing evidence that Walter intended the land as a permanent memorial, not as satisfaction of a debt. The claim was denied. Tom retained the property. The case was dismissed with prejudice. Tom read the final paragraph 3 times to make sure he understood. They'd won. Against all odds. Against a powerful lawyer with unlimited resources. Against the weight of that notation on the deed. They'd won. Ben let out a whoop that echoed through the shop. Hank was grinning. Evelyn burst through the door, saw Tom's face, started crying. Morrison called 30 seconds later. "Did you see? We won," Tom said, still not quite believing it. "You won. Walter won. The land is protected. The foundation continues. Justice, Mr. Brennan. It still exists sometimes." After the call ended, Tom sat in silence for a long moment. Then he stood, walked out to where the tractor sat in its place of honor, and put his hand on the fender. "We did it," he whispered. "You and me and Ben. We did it." That night, they gathered at the diner again. Half the town showed up, celebrating a victory that belonged to all of them. The foundation would continue. The grants would keep flowing. The land would stay protected. Patricia called from Denver, her voice lighter than Tom had ever heard it. "Richard is furious. His firm is talking about appeal. But my lawyer says they have no grounds. It's over." "How are you doing?" Tom asked. "Better. Free. My father's memory is protected. That's all I wanted. That's more than I ever had. Thank you for standing up, for testifying, for fighting your own husband. Thank you for showing me who my father was. And Tom, when you're ready, I'd like to join the foundation board. Help carry this forward. We'd be honored." Tom hung up and looked around the crowded diner. Dale laughing with his family, Ben talking to friends from school, Angela sitting with Frank, listening to stories about Walter, Hank holding court at the counter. All of them connected by this strange inheritance, this broken tractor that had somehow fixed everything. Tom slipped it outside, needing air and quiet. The November night was cold, stars brilliant overhead. He walked down Main Street to the shop, let himself in, turned on the lights. The tractor sat there, blue and perfect and permanent. The work that had started everything. The teacher that had never stopped teaching. Tom climbed into the seat, sat with his hands on the wheel, and felt the weight of the past 6 months settle over him. The despair and the hope. The loss and the finding. The breaking down and the building back up. He'd won the lawsuit. But more than that, he'd won something harder to define. A life that mattered. A purpose that went beyond survival. A legacy that honored the past while building the future. The tractor had taught him all of it. Had been Walter's final gift, perfectly designed to transform the person who took the time to restore it. Tom sat there in the silent shop until the cold drove him back outside. Tomorrow he'd celebrate more. Tonight he just needed to be grateful. For the work, for the lesson, for the inheritance that couldn't be measured in money or property or court decisions. For the understanding that some things, once truly learned, could never be taken away. Not by lawyers, not by judges, not by anyone. That was the real victory, and it was his to keep forever. Winter came to Nebraska with quiet authority, snow falling on the first day of December, and not stopping for 3 days. The world turned white and still. The sand hills transformed into something from a dream. Tom stood at the window of the house he and Angela were renting, watching Ben build a snowman in the yard, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not happiness exactly, but its foundation. The absence of the constant low-grade panic that had defined his life since the bridge project collapsed. The lawsuit was over. The foundation was secure. The tractor sat in its place of honor at the shop. Ben was thriving in school. Angela had started looking at houses they might buy together, tentative steps toward rebuilding what they'd lost. Everything should have felt perfect, but Frank was dying. Tom had known it was coming since Thanksgiving, when Frank had told him about the cancer. But knowing and facing were different things. Frank had been the bridge between Tom and Walter, the keeper of secrets, the gentle guide who'd helped Tom understand what the tractor was trying to teach. Losing him felt like losing the last connection to everything that had made the journey possible. Tom visited Frank most afternoons now, sitting in the old rancher's living room, talking about nothing important while Frank dozed in his recliner. Some days Frank was lucid and sharp, telling stories about Walter and Eugene, filling in details that added texture to the history Tom was living with. Other days Frank was lost in medication fog, barely aware Tom was there. On one of the good days, a week before Christmas, Frank pulled out a thick envelope from beside his chair. "Been saving this for you. Walter gave it to me 5 years ago. Said to give it to you after you'd fought your fight. However it turned out." Tom took the envelope, felt the weight of it. "What is it?" "Walter's journals. The real ones, not the sanitized versions in his papers. Everything he felt about Eugene, about the guilt, about the land, about you." "Why wait until now?" "Because," Frank said, his voice weak but steady, "you needed to become who you are before you could understand who he was. If you'd read these at the beginning, you might have been crushed by the weight. Now you're strong enough to carry it." Tom opened the envelope that night after Ben had gone to bed. Inside were 3 leather-bound journals, their pages yellowed with age, Walter's careful handwriting filling every line. The first journal began in 1971, days after Eugene's death. "I killed my best friend tonight. The police say it was self-defense, that Eugene threw the first punch, that I only fought back. But I know the truth. I could have walked away, could have de-escalated, could have done 100 things differently. Instead, I swung and Eugene fell, and now he's dying in a hospital room while I sit free in my house." The entries continued, day after day, year after year. Walter's guilt bleeding onto every page, his attempts to make meaning from the tragedy, his decision to buy the grassland, to keep it pristine, to turn his shame into something that honored what Eugene had loved. Tom read through the night, unable to stop. By morning, he understood his grandfather in a way he never had before. Walter hadn't been a stoic rancher bearing his burden silently. He'd been a man barely holding himself together, using work and purpose to outrun the despair that dogged his every step. The parallels to Tom's own life were inescapable. 2 men, 2 generations apart, both drowning in guilt they didn't entirely earn but couldn't escape. Both saved by work, by land, by the choice to build something meaningful from the wreckage. The final journal entry was dated 3 months before Walter's death. "Thomas inherited my depression along with my genes. I've watched him struggle the way I struggled, seen him lose everything the way I almost did. But I also see his strength, his capacity to learn, his love for his son. If I can give him a path back to himself, maybe that redeems both of us. The tractor is the test, the land is the reward, but the real gift is understanding that broken doesn't mean finished, that restoration is always possible, that you can carry weight and still move forward." Tom closed the journal, his vision blurred with tears. Ben found him like that in the morning, sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by Walter's words. "Are you okay?" Tom nodded. "Yeah, I just understand now. Why all of this? Why me? Why the tractor?" "What does it say?" "That Walter and I weren't that different. Both of us carrying things that weren't entirely ours to carry. Both of us finding our way back through work." Ben picked up one of the journals, flipped through it. "Can I read these?" Tom hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. You should know where you come from. The full story, not the sanitized version. Frank died on New Year's Eve, quietly in his sleep, the way he'd wanted. The funeral was massive, the church overflowing, people standing in the cold outside because there was no room. Tom gave one of the eulogies, talking about wisdom and friendship, and the way some men taught by example rather than words. They buried Frank next to his wife on a hill overlooking the valley. After everyone else had left, Tom and Ben stood at the grave in the fading light. "He was the last one," Ben said quietly. "The last person who knew great-grandpa and Eugene together." Tom nodded. "Now it's just stories, memories of memories. That's sad, or it's how it's supposed to be. The past becomes history, and history becomes legend, and legend becomes the stories we tell to understand who we are." They drove back to town through the winter evening, the snow reflecting the last light, making everything luminous and temporary. January brought a letter from Patricia Moss. She was moving to Nebraska, buying a small house in Valentine, taking the position on the foundation board seriously. Her divorce was final. Her life in Denver was over. She wanted a fresh start in a place that meant something. Tom helped her move in on a Saturday in late January, hauling boxes into the little house on Maple Street. Ben came too, working efficiently, making Patricia laugh with his dry observations about her book collection. "You have 5 boxes labeled kitchen stuff," Ben said. "How many spatulas does one person need?" Patricia smiled. "An embarrassing number, apparently. I was stress shopping after Richard and I separated. Cookware seems safer than wine." Over coffee afterward, Patricia asked about the foundation's plans. "We've protected about 3,000 acres so far, helped 50 families. But I want to expand, not just Nebraska, but neighboring states. Create a network of preserved grassland that has real ecological impact." That's ambitious. It's what Walter would want, and what your father would want, a living legacy, not just one memorial. "Count me in, whatever you need." They talked for hours, planning projects, discussing strategy, building something that felt bigger than either of them. Tom drove home that evening feeling energized in a way he hadn't since before the lawsuit. There was work to do, purpose to chase, a mission that mattered. But he also felt the absence of Frank, the empty space where guidance had been. He was on his own now, making decisions without a safety net, hoping he was worthy of the trust that had been placed in him. In February, on the anniversary of Tom first seeing the tractor in that pasture, he and Ben drove out to the homestead. The winter sun was weak, the land still locked in snow, but the memorial stone stood clear, dark against white. They'd brought tools. They were going to start the next restoration project, the one Ben had suggested months ago. Eugene's tractor. Patricia had tracked it down through family connections, and they'd purchased it for more than it was worth, but less than its meaning. It sat in a barn in Wyoming, waiting to be brought home. "This is a 3-year project," Tom said. "Maybe longer. We take our time, do it right." Ben nodded. "When we're done, it sits here, next to the memorial." 2 friends together again. They stood in the cold, looking at the land that had changed everything. The grassland that Walter had protected, that Eugene had loved, that Tom had nearly lost and then fought to keep. Behind them, the Ford 8N sat on its trailer, brought out for this moment. Tom had loaded it that morning, wanting it here for the beginning of the next journey. "You know what I realized?" Ben said. "What?" "This isn't really about tractors. It never was." Tom smiled. "No, it's not. It's about understanding that some things are worth the work, even when the work is hard, even when it costs more than it should." "When did you get so philosophical?" "I learned from you, and from great-grandpa, and from this place." They climbed back in the truck, drove back to town through the winter afternoon. Tomorrow they'd start planning the Eugene Moss restoration. Tomorrow they'd continue building the foundation. Tomorrow they'd keep moving forward. But today they'd honored the past, and that was enough. Spring arrived early that year, the snow melting in March, the grassland greening with startling speed. Tom and Angela bought a house together, not the rental, but the property Evelyn had told Tom about months earlier. Walter's original house, the one he and Eugene had built with their own hands in 1953. The house needed work. Decades of neglect had taken their toll. But the bones were good, and the history was priceless. Tom and Ben spent weekends renovating, stripping old wallpaper, replacing fixtures, bringing the house back to life. Angela painted the kitchen a soft yellow, said it reminded her of morning light. Ben claimed the bedroom that looked out over the cottonwood trees. Tom took the small office where Walter must have done his paperwork, sat at night reading through the journals, feeling his grandfather's presence in the quiet. They moved in on a Saturday in April, their furniture scattered through rooms that echoed with emptiness that would slowly fill. That first night, lying in bed next to Angela, Tom felt the strangeness of it all. 2 years ago, he'd been alone in that Omaha apartment, broken and directionless. Now he was here, in a house with history, with a family knitting itself back together, with work that mattered. Angela rolled over, looked at him in the dim light from the window. "You're thinking too loud. I can hear it." Tom smiled, just marveling at how much has changed. "You changed it. By doing the work. By not giving up." "Walter changed it. He set everything in motion." Angela shook her head. "Walter gave you a chance. You're the one who took it." They lay in silence for a while, listening to the house settle, to Ben's music playing quietly from his room, to the wind in the cottonwood trees outside. "Tom," Angela said softly, "I'm glad we're trying again. Whatever happens, I'm glad we're trying." "Me too." The restoration business continued to grow. Tom hired 2 more apprentices, young people hungry to learn, willing to do the slow, careful work that quality demanded. The shop ran 2 shifts now, projects overlapping, machinery in various states of disassembly filling every available space. Ben worked full-time after graduating high school in May. He'd decided to defer college, wanted to spend 2 years learning the trade properly before pursuing engineering. Tom had worried about it, but Angela had supported Ben's choice. He's finding his own path, she'd said. Let him. So Ben became lead technician on several projects, teaching newer apprentices, developing his own style that blended Tom's careful precision with youthful confidence. Watching his son work, Tom felt pride that went beyond the personal. This was legacy in action, knowledge transferred, skills preserved. On a Tuesday in June, Tom received a call from a number he didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was male, elderly, cautious. "Is this Thomas Brennan, the man who restored Walter Brennan's tractor?" "Yes, this is Tom. My name is Michael Moss, Eugene's son, Patricia's half-brother. I wonder if I might visit you. There's something I'd like to discuss." Michael arrived 3 days later, driving from Wyoming in a pickup that had seen better decades. He was in his 70s, weathered and lean, with his father's eyes. Tom recognized them from the photograph Frank had shown him. They sat in Tom's living room, drinking coffee, talking carefully around the reason for the visit. Finally, Michael pulled out a folder. "After the lawsuit ended, I started going through my father's things, papers my mother saved. Found this tucked in his old army jacket." He handed Tom a letter, yellowed with age, dated 1952. The letter was from Eugene to his mother, written from Korea. In it, he talked about Walter, about fixing a broken Jeep together, about learning that machinery could be healed with patience and care. The letter was casual, affectionate, full of the small details of military life. But at the end, Eugene had written something that made Tom's breath catch. "Ma, if anything happens to me over here, I want you to know that Walt is the best friend I've ever had. If I don't make it home, tell him to find some land somewhere, keep it wild, and think of me when the grass is blowing. That's all the memorial I'd need, just grass and sky and someone who remembers." Tom read the letter 3 times, his hands trembling slightly. Michael watched him, his expression unreadable. "Patricia told me about the grassland, about the memorial, about your fight to keep it. When I found this letter, I knew I had to bring it to you." "Why?" "Because my father asked for exactly what your grandfather gave him, grass and sky and someone who remembers." Walter was honoring Eugene's actual wishes, not making arbitrary choices. This letter proves it. "This would have changed the lawsuit, made it impossible for your brother-in-law to win." Michael nodded. "I know. But I only found it last month, after everything was over. I'm sorry, if I'd found it sooner, you might have been spared a lot of pain." Tom handed the letter back carefully. "No, keep it safe. It's your family's history. But thank you for showing me, for confirming that Walter was doing exactly what Eugene wanted." "Actually," Michael said, "I'd like to give it to you for the Foundation archives, so people understand the full story, the wishes that started everything." Tom accepted the letter with reverence, understanding the gift he was receiving. Not just paper and ink, but validation. Proof that Walter's 45-year mission had been rooted in explicit understanding, not just assumed interpretation. That evening, Tom and Ben drove out to the memorial. Tom brought the letter, read it aloud standing at the stone. The wind moved through the grass around them, carrying the scent of earth and growing things. "He got his wish," Ben said when Tom finished reading. "Grass and sky and people who remember." Tom carefully placed the letter in a protective sleeve, would later frame it and hang it in the Foundation office. But for now, he just stood with his son in the place that had started everything, feeling the circle close. Summer brought the Foundation's second annual conference, now expanded to 3 days, drawing attendees from across the country. Ranchers, farmers, conservationists, academics, policymakers. The movement that Frank had predicted was real and growing. Tom gave the keynote again, but this time he shared the stage with Patricia, with Michael, with Dale. 4 people connected by tragedy and restoration, telling the story together. The audience listened in rapt silence, and when they finished, the applause was long and genuine. After the conference, Tom felt simultaneously energized and exhausted. The work was expanding faster than he could manage. The Foundation needed a full-time director. The restoration business needed better organization. His responsibilities were pulling him in too many directions. Angela found him sitting on their back porch late one night, staring at nothing. "You're overwhelmed." Tom nodded. I don't know how to do all of this. Run a business, lead a foundation, be a father and a husband. Something's going to break. Then delegate. You don't have to do everything yourself. I don't know how to let go. Angela sat beside him. Walter spent 50 years carrying Eugene's death alone. It nearly destroyed him. Don't make the same mistake. Let other people help carry the weight. She was right, and Tom knew it. Over the next month, he made changes. Patricia became executive director of the foundation, drawing a salary, taking over the day-to-day operations. Dale became field coordinator, visiting properties, evaluating applications. Tom remained board chair, but stepped back from management. At the restoration business, he promoted Ben to co-owner, brought in a manager to handle scheduling and finances, freed himself to focus on training and quality control rather than every decision. The changes were hard at first. Tom struggled with letting go, with trusting others to maintain the standards he'd fought to establish. But slowly he learned what Angela had been trying to teach him, that leadership sometimes meant stepping back. That legacy was built not by doing everything yourself, but by empowering others to carry the work forward. In August, Tom and Ben began work on Eugene's tractor in earnest. The farmall had arrived from Wyoming in pieces, its condition even worse than Walter's Ford had been. They set it up in the shop, began the careful process of documentation and disassembly. This time, Tom had apprentices helping, learning the techniques, asking questions. The restoration became a teaching tool, a way to pass down not just mechanical skills, but the philosophy behind them. Patience, respect for the machine, understanding that shortcuts cost more than time. Ben led much of the work, his confidence grown, his skills sharp. Tom stepped back, let his son teach, watched with pride as Ben explained concepts Tom had taught him a year ago. On a Saturday afternoon in late August, Tom's phone rang. Evelyn Price, her voice tight. "Tom, I have news. It's not good." His stomach dropped. "What happened?" "Richard Chamberlain filed a notice of appeal. He's trying to overturn the judgment. Says the trial court made errors of law that require reversal." Tom felt cold. "Can he do that?" "He can file. Whether he'll succeed is another question. Morrison says the judgment was solid. The court's reasoning sound. But Tom, an appeal means more legal fees, more uncertainty, more months of this hanging over you." Tom closed his eyes. "How much will this cost?" "Hard to say. Morrison's still working pro bono, but there are court costs, expert witnesses for the appellate brief, maybe 10 to 20,000. I don't have that. The foundation might. If the board approves using some of the conservation revenue to protect the legal foundation of the whole organization." Tom thought about that. Using money meant to preserve grassland to fight a lawsuit. It felt wrong, but if they lost the appeal, there'd be no foundation to fund anyway. "Set up a board meeting, we'll discuss it." The board meeting was tense. Patricia argued strongly for using foundation funds to defend the appeal. Dale supported her. Others worried about setting precedent, about mixing organizational money with Tom's personal legal problems. Tom listened to the arguments, feeling the weight of every word. Finally, he spoke. "This started as my problem, but it's become bigger than me. If Richard wins his appeal, the foundation collapses. Every acre we've protected becomes uncertain. Every family we've helped might lose their conservation contracts. We're not defending my inheritance anymore. We're defending the work itself." The vote was unanimous. The foundation would cover the legal costs of the appeal. Morrison filed a comprehensive brief, 90 pages of argument and case law, demonstrating why the trial court had correctly interpreted Walter's intent. Richard's lawyers filed an equally comprehensive reply, attacking every point, arguing that the notation on the deed was unambiguous and controlling. The oral arguments were scheduled for February, 8 months away. 8 more months of uncertainty, 8 more months of wondering if everything could still be taken away. Tom tried not to let it consume him. He focused on the work, on Eugene's restoration, on teaching apprentices, on his family, on living as if the future was secure even though it wasn't. But some nights, lying awake while Angela slept beside him, he felt the old darkness creeping back. The depression that had nearly destroyed him 2 years ago. It whispered that he was fooling himself, that success was temporary, that everything he'd built could collapse in an instant. On one of those nights, unable to sleep, Tom got up and went to the garage. The Ford 8N sat there, gleaming in the dim light. He climbed into the seat, sat with his hands on the wheel, and thought about Walter sitting in this same machine 70 years ago, carrying his own darkness. Ben found him there at dawn, still sitting in the tractor's seat, Couldn't sleep? Tom shook his head. The appeal is getting to you. Tom looked at his son. I'm scared, Ben. Scared of losing everything again. Scared I'm not strong enough to go through it twice. Ben climbed up on the tractor, sat on the fender beside his father. Dad, you taught me that restoration is about the process, not the outcome. That the work is the point. Even if we lose the appeal, they can't take away what you've learned, what you've built inside yourself, the man you've become. Tom felt tears on his cheeks. When did you become the teacher? I learned from the best. They sat together as the sun rose, father and son, both holding on to what mattered when everything else felt uncertain. The months crawled by. Fall became winter. The grassland turned brown, then white with snow. Eugene's restoration progressed steadily, the farm all slowly coming back to life under Ben's careful hands. The foundation continued its work, protecting more land, helping more families, building momentum despite the uncertain legal future. Christmas came, and with it, family. Angela's parents visited from Colorado. Ben's friends from school stopped by constantly. The house that had been empty in April was now full of life and noise, and the ordinary chaos of people who belonged together. On Christmas Eve, after everyone else had gone to bed, Tom and Angela sat in the living room, the tree lights casting soft colors across the walls. Whatever happens with the appeal, Angela said quietly, we'll handle it. Together. Tom nodded. I know. It's just hard to accept that it might all be for nothing. It's not for nothing. Look around. Look at Ben. Look at the business. Look at the foundation. Look at us. None of that goes away regardless of what some judges decide. She was right. Tom knew she was right. But fear wasn't logical. It crept in through the cracks, found the weak places, whispered lies that felt like truth. The oral arguments arrived on a cold February morning. Tom made the drive to Omaha, where the federal appellate court sat, Morrison beside him, reviewing notes, preparing for every possible question the judges might ask. The courtroom was formal and intimidating. 3 judges sitting in elevated chairs, looking down at the lawyers who would argue before them. Tom sat in the gallery with Patricia and Ben, watching as Morrison stood and began to speak. Morrison was brilliant. He walked through the trial court's reasoning, showed why it was correct, anticipated every objection and countered it before it could be raised. He made Walter's intent clear, made the conservation purpose obvious, made the notation on the deed an explanation rather than a promise. Richard's lawyer was good too. He attacked the trial court's logic, argued that feelings and intentions didn't override clear written words, insisted that the notation was legally binding regardless of context. The judges asked hard questions of both sides, pressed on precedent, challenged assumptions, tested arguments. After 90 minutes, it was over. The court would issue its decision in due course. No timeline given, just more waiting. Tom walked out of the courthouse into the winter sun, feeling hollow. The arguments were done. The evidence was presented. Now the only thing left was to wait for 3 strangers to decide his fate. The waiting was torture. Days became weeks, became months. Spring arrived, the grassland greened, and still no decision. Tom tried to focus on work, on family, on the ordinary rhythm of life, but part of him was always waiting for the phone to ring, for Evelyn or Morrison to call with news. In late April, almost 3 months after the oral arguments, Morrison called. Decision is posted. Tom, you won. Tom sat down hard, the relief washing over him like water. Say that again. You won. The appellate court affirmed the trial court's decision in full, found no error in the legal analysis, upheld the finding that Walter's intent was clear. The land stays with you. The foundation is secure. It's over. For real this time? For real. Richard is out of appeals. The case is closed. Tom couldn't speak, couldn't process the magnitude of it. After 2 years of legal warfare, after the constant threat hanging over everything, it was finally done. He called Ben first, then Angela, then Patricia, then Dale. Called everyone who'd been waiting with him, who'd carried the weight alongside him. The relief in their voices echoed his own. That evening, Tom drove out to the memorial alone. He needed to tell Walter, needed to stand at Eugene's stone and acknowledge that the mission was complete. The land was protected. The legacy was secure. The spring grass was tall, moving in waves across the rolling hills. The sun was setting, painting the sky in impossible colors. Tom stood at the memorial as the light faded, feeling the presence of the 2 men whose tragedy had become his inheritance. We did it, he said to the wind. Your land is safe. The foundation will continue. Everything you tried to build, it's real now. It's permanent. He stayed until full dark, then drove home to the house Walter and Eugene had built, to the family he'd restored alongside the tractor, to the life he'd earned through work and patience, and refusing to quit when quitting would have been easier. Summer arrived with heat and clear skies. Eugene's tractor was nearly complete, just paint and final details remaining. Tom and Ben worked on it together, the apprentices watching, learning, understanding that restoration was about more than mechanics. On a Saturday in July, they moved the completed farmall to the memorial site, set it up facing east, toward the sunrise, complementing Walter's Ford, which faced west toward sunset. Two tractors, two friends, perfectly balanced. The dedication ceremony drew 100 people. Patricia spoke about her father, about the man she'd never really known, but had come to understand through the love his best friend had shown for his memory. Michael spoke about Eugene's letter, about explicit wishes honored across decades. Dale talked about the foundation's work, about the thousands of acres now protected, about the legacy growing beyond anything Walter could have imagined. Tom spoke last, keeping it brief. This isn't an ending, it's a continuation. The work doesn't stop. It just changes form. Walter and Eugene started something with their friendship. We're carrying it forward, and someday someone else will carry it after us. That's what legacy means. Not what you leave behind, but what you inspire others to continue. After the ceremony, after the crowd dispersed, Tom and Ben stood alone at the memorial, the two tractors gleaming in the late afternoon sun, the grassland stretching endlessly in every direction. 3 years, Ben said, from finding a broken tractor to this. Has it only been 3 years? Feels like a lifetime. It kind of was. A whole life rebuilt. Tom put his arm around his son's shoulders. Thanks for being part of it, for sticking with me when I was lost, for believing we could fix what looked broken beyond repair. I learned it from you. You never gave up on the tractor. I wasn't going to give up on you. They stood together as the sun dropped toward the horizon, both thinking about the journey that had brought them here. The inheritance that had looked like an insult but turned out to be salvation. The broken machine that had taught them what wholeness meant. Tom's phone buzzed, a text from Angela. Dinner's ready. Come home. Home. The word that had lost its meaning 2 years ago and slowly regained it. The house he shared with his family. The shop where he taught and built. The town that had become his place. The land that would be protected forever. All of it home now. All of it earned through work that mattered. Tom and Ben walked back to the truck, started the engine, began the drive back to Valentine as the summer evening settled around them. Tomorrow they'd start a new restoration project, a 1940 John Deere some farmer's widow had found in a barn. Tomorrow the foundation would approve another round of grants. Tomorrow life would continue in the ordinary, extraordinary way it did when you'd found your purpose. But tonight, they'd honored the past. They'd completed the work Walter and Eugene had started together in Korea 70 years ago, fixing machinery, building friendship, learning that broken things could be healed with patience and care. The tractors sat at the memorial, silent and permanent, testaments to what endured. Not the machines themselves, though they would last decades more with proper care, but the lessons they taught, the values they represented, the understanding that legacy was built not through grand gestures, but through the daily choice to do right even when it cost you. Tom glanced in the rearview mirror as they drove away, saw the two tractors growing smaller in the distance, the grassland vast and protected around them. Walter's Ford and Eugene's farmall, side by side forever, watching over the land they'd loved. The inheritance was complete. The work was finished. And Tom Brennan, who'd arrived in Nebraska 3 years ago as a broken man with nothing but a rusted tractor to his name, drove toward home knowing he'd finally earned the gift Walter had given him. Not the land, not the money, not even the tractor. But the understanding that restoration was always possible, that broken didn't mean finished, that the work itself was the reward, and that some inheritances took a lifetime to fully receive, but once received, could never be taken away. The sun set behind them, painting the Nebraska sky in shades of gold and red, and Tom drove through the gathering dusk toward the life he'd rebuilt, one day at a time, one bolt tightened, one lesson learned. The work continued, the legacy endured, and the tractors stood watch over the grassland, silent witnesses to the truth that broken things, given time and care and patience, could always be made whole again. including the broken hearts of men who thought they were beyond repair, especially those